TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. NATO's ISIS Al Qaeda alliance hunting down and killing the Christians in Syria. We warned about this. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we still under World War III alert. Middle East on fire. The geopolitical chessboard is filled with plenty of danger. Let's get into it.
As people were in mass, okay, they were attending service, and the church was blown up, and you have about 20 to 30 people that were killed, and it's really one of the worst massacres that Christians in Syria have seen. And I can show you some of the photographs. This is what the church looked like. I was talking earlier actually to Kavor about this church. You can see here the icon of St. John is just splattered with blood, and this goes without saying for those of you, for everyone, but for those of you who don't know, I mean, Syria is considered the birthplace of Christianity, just like Palestine, because it was exported, or rather, spread from Damascus to Europe from Syria, right? So both areas played a considerable role. And before this war in 2011, you had 10% of the population that were Christian. Iraq, I don't know the percentage, but I know that how much it shrunk by. It shrunk by about 90%, and the same thing in Syria, right? So that's thanks to the United States, that's thanks to Israel, that's thanks to the United Kingdom, to the European Union. And, it's not just the war itself that has driven people away, but then the normalization of the new regime, which has a history of murdering Christians. I mean, this guy who remember, there were no elections, right? Funnily enough. So Bashar al-Assad was a dictator because the elections were supposedly fake, although no one provides real tangible evidence of that. They just assume it's fake because they don't like Syria. And then this guy who declares himself the president, a former commander in ISIS, a former commander in Al Qaeda. So, he in both organizations. He declares himself the president, and no one has a problem with that. He gets sanctions relief. He gets, meetings with European diplomats and foreign ministers, and he kidnapped. Just so you know, just so you understand why this attack on the church is not some kind of accident, and that, especially with the timing, because they were going after Alawites. They were murdering Alawites, which are. Syria is like a mosaic of ethnic groups and religious groups. So it's majority Sunni. You have a few Shia, you have a few Christians, etc., right? Armenians, Palestinians, Bedouins, Kurds, you name it. So what they did, I'm talking from after December, when he came to power, Jolani, when they ousted Assad, they started assassinating, murdering, hunting down, slaughtering Alawites that live predominantly on the coastal area of Syria. So, Tartus, Ladiye, this basically, it's not Damascus in the capital, it's further away up the coast, right? It's a few hours drive. And I and others were warning that, this is, of course, by itself, madness. It's ethnic cleansing, basically. That's what it is. It's like a genocide. You're trying to finish them off, these people off, and claiming, like some 20-year-old boy or a teenager who's like 19 or 20 years old is a regime remnant. The guy was a child. He's probably born when the war. There are people just like babies that were killed. They're literally nothing to do with this logic, right? It's ethnic cleansing. Is what it was. And I and others like Kavor were warning that this is going to spiral out of control because they won't put a leash on these people. And as a matter of fact, it's not that they won't put a leash, it's that they sanctioned this. They know who these people are, meaning the West knows exactly who this guy is. They brought Al Qaeda to power because Al Qaeda doesn't oppose Zionism. I mean, when's the last time you ever heard of Al Qaeda or ISIS attacking Israel? Never. They won't do a fucking thing. So they do what they're best at. They go and kill other Muslims. They go and kill other Arabs. That's what Al Qaeda and ISIS are for. They're Western tools. So they started killing Alawites. Then they went after Druze as well. And then Israel was pretending to come to their aid and saying they're going to invade Jeramana, which is like the wackiest shit I've ever heard. And then, of course, now they're going for the Christians. because they saw it. Like no one is stopping them. Why should they stop if no one is going to put their foot down, right? Like they're an irrational, violent actor, and no one is getting in their way. On the contrary, they're getting all these accolades and perks and sanctions relief and rehabilitation, normalization, resumption of ties, détente. I mean, why would you stop, right? Like especially if you've had a bounty of $10 million lifted. I mean, you must feel pretty invincible right now. And obviously that doesn't justify any of this. On the contrary, I'm trying to explain the rationale or the lack thereof behind these killers. And Jolani specifically, just so you understand that this is not some kind of like hypothesizing or, like, oh, it's guilty by association. No. This guy personally supervised, okay, Jolani, the new Syrian president, yeah, or self-proclaimed president. He attacked Ma'lula, which is a Christian town outside of Damascus. It's about an hour's drive. And it's one of the only places on earth where people still speak Aramaic, which is what Jesus spoke. Yeah. And Aramaic is like a cousin of Arabic. Yeah. So, but people still speak it in various parts of Syria and like very, very small places. Ma'lula is one of the most prominent ones. And I think one of the first monasteries in the world is there as well. So he kidnapped, this is Jolani, right? He and his thugs went and kidnapped the nuns of Saint Tekla of the covenant there, and then I think it was Qatar. I don't remember who brokered some kind of deal. There was a deal afterwards, I think a year later, where the nuns were exchanged, and of course, because of extraneous circumstances, I need to watch my mouth. But someone liberated the town. You can go look up who it was. Okay, I don't know if I'm allowed to state facts, but because apparently I get in trouble for that. But my point is just that this guy has a history of attacking Christians, kidnapping Christians, desecrating Christian sites, and so does his cabinet. And so it makes perfect sense that he gets to power, and then you have a church being blown up all of a sudden. And keep in mind, Christians were also persecuted, as I was just saying in my last sentence, during the war. But these kinds of bombings, like in Damascus, I mean, you would. I don't remember many of them. It does stand out. It's I mean, shocking either way. And another thing that stands out, which I'm glad Syrian girl pointed out, is another bombing, but not in a church, but rather in a mosque. Okay, so she said the bombing of the church in Damascus reminds me of the bombing of the mosque that killed the mosque in which Sheikh Bouti was killed. Yeah. So the terrorist Wahhabists behind the so-called revolution attacked Christians and normal Muslims, but never Israel. Right, I made that point. So Sheikh Bouti was if I remember correctly, he was a Sunni cleric, and the complete opposite of these Wahhabi takfiri jihadists like Jolani. So instead of saying, oh yeah, we need to go after, and they don't, sometimes they don't say it like that. They'll say like purify, which basically means murder. Sheikh Bouti wouldn't do that. On the contrary, he was preaching unity and these kinds of things. So they literally murdered him. They assassinated him because he this is the kind of thinking that is promoted by Wahhabism, and even actually in earlier. When we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm talking specifically about Zawahiri, for example, right? Because you have different branches within that, and Muslim Brotherhood is more of a political movement than a religious one, like Wahhabism. People who are Wahhabis like Jolani do not believe in elections, yeah. Whereas Muslim Brotherhood, they want to have elections and participate in politics and so on, and have Islam instituted through those democratic mechanisms. But people like Zawahiri, his version of that was that you can kill other Muslims if it's perfectly fine to go and murder another Muslim if they're not up to your standards, which is like a blank check to just go crazy. It's like it's the kind of logic that a psychopath uses, right? And that's exactly what he did. And he almost killed me actually when the Egyptian embassy was blown up right opposite, or not opposite, but adjacent to my school in Islamabad. So that, just to give you an idea, this is despite being, and then of course, what did he do? He went and mentored bin Laden. This is in the early 90s, right? So he had his own group in Egypt, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and then he went kind of and just switched to Al Qaeda full time, basically. So he went and became a full Wahhabist, yeah, which kind of proves my point. But anyway. Just to underscore the kind of mentality that we're dealing with here, it's like they will murder everyone. There is no one who is off limits. So I know I'm going through the lists of Alawites, Druze, Christians, because these are minorities. But these people will kill and have killed, and they've done this not just in Syria but in Lebanon and also in Iraq. other Sunni Muslims. They don't. There's nothing that will stop them. They just want to murder, and that's what they're good at, and that's why they work for the West and they provide these services for the West, right? Again, just ask yourself when's the last time that they not even attacked, but like let's say resisted. You know, the person who set this off had the choice of going after Israeli troops which are illegally occupying Syria, or NATO troops, Turkey, US, and they said no. Let me go and blow up a bunch of civilians at mass. Like, who would do that? You know, that kind of behavior reminds me of when the Israelis, the Mossad, were throwing grenades in the synagogues in Iraq to get Jews to move to Israel so they could increase the population, which is what they did. And they, it's got an Israeli tinge to it, right? These are some of the victims that were killed during the explosion, right? I'm not going to show you. I can't show you, unfortunately, like, the direct aftermath, but yeah, it's really awful. It's really awful. And what's shocking, what's really so obscene is that if you go like right out, I know where this church is. Actually, I didn't recognize the name at first, but I was talking, maybe some of you watched that stream earlier when I was live with Kavor, and I was talking to someone, and I remembered actually where this is. It's like, I mean, for anyone who knows Damascus, if you're going from basically downtown Damascus to Jaramana, which used to be kind of outside Damascus, but then it grew so big, it's part of it. You pass this church on your right. There's like a cemetery. It's that church. It's that exact place, which is wild because I didn't connect the two. And then it's like a working class neighborhood, and yeah, this is inside. You can see this was just a few hours before the attack. Again, like I said, it's the birthplace of Christianity. Okay, and what's shocking, just to resume my previous or my former sentence, is that if you go through the Suq al-Hamadiyya right now in Syria, which is like the main market, it's like Syria's Oxford Street, if you will, or whatever. It's a bazaar. It's a grand market, and you can walk through there and you'll see now for sale ISIS patches and ISIS flags, and it's just like so normalized. And as a matter of fact, the security services, or so-called security services, basically Jolani's henchmen, which are Al-Qaeda troops, and half of them aren't even Syrian and can't even speak Arabic. Yeah, I said that. It's true. Half of them are not even Syrians. They're basically like Israelis, but they think, okay, well, this is my land because I'm a Muslim and I'm going to go, and they're fundamentalists. They're brainwashed, and they fall prey to these recruiters for Al Qaeda who say, well, yeah, come and fight and everything, and they make them feel like they're doing something holy or something good or productive. And actually, what they're just doing is America and Israel's dirty work. So a lot of them come from. You've got like thousands of Uyghur troops from China. You've got people from Pakistan, people from Tunisia, whatever, if all over the place. I mean, Jolani himself is I think his parents are Syrian. He's born in Saudi Arabia, and they had to get they had to put him in charge and rehabilitate him and so on. But like I said, a lot of the people that now have key positions in Syria's cabinet or in the military are not Syrians. And I just want you to think about what a crazy security threat that is. Can you imagine, for example, in the United States, that you give you let someone who's from, I don't know, Mozambique or from the United Kingdom or from Guatemala become a general in the US Army, and he doesn't have citizenship, and what kind of security issues that poses? I mean, how do you know this person isn't a spy, and how can they even get that job if they're not a citizen? This is not one person or one case I'm talking about. There are Egyptians, there are Turks, there are people from China that have been given these massive responsibilities that should be going to Syrians first and foremost, and they don't even have citizenship. They don't even, some of them don't even speak Arabic. What kind of madness is this? It's not even a real country. It's a mockery. Do you see how? And this is important to understand, because that shows you that this revolution, or as they call it, this so-called revolution, wasn't a grassroots thing, because you wouldn't have to go to that extent to pool people, from all over the world. I mean, I'm sorry, Syria is a very capable country, and like I don't know now the figures because they're a few years old, but I mean it's got a very young population. That's a fact, right? They're not under 18 anymore now, but basically early 20s or mid 20s, so it's still a young population. Tons of university graduates. You can't tell me that you couldn't find a Syrian to fill these job positions. That's a bunch of bollocks. Okay, that's just a lie. This is. I can guarantee you, I bet you anything you like that those people are not only making a mockery of the country, but they're feeding intelligence back to their home countries as well, in Egypt, Turkey, Israel, So what was his response to this church bombing, Jolani? He said that it was a criminal explosion. He didn't call it a terrorist bombing, a criminal explosion. Now you look at that and you tell me if that's a criminal explosion or a terrorist bombing. I mean, honestly, really, come on. What is a criminal explosion? Is that like someone who leaves, they left a gas canister open and then someone lit a match? I mean, like criminal neglect or something. What is a criminal explosion? Come on, the language it's so unusual and bizarre, especially after something like this where it's very clearly an act of terrorism. It just goes to further confirm that this government or regime that he heads is normalizing this stuff, and you can't call anyone. You got to call the police or you got to call the security services, and instead of getting someone who's concerned for you, you get someone who shows up with an ISIS patch. Basically, maybe that's the person who blew up the church in the first place. Maybe that's someone who's beheading other Syrians just last week. How could you know? And it's really shocking how it's been normalized like that. And this was extraordinary how Jolani was more upset over a US base in Qatar being bombed, right? I'm just reading his tweet here, but it's correct, than the church bombing in the heart of Damascus. Yeah, that's correct. And, this video, I came across this video. I can't tell if it's the same person, okay? So you'll have to help me with that. They do bear a striking resemblance, but this guy who's smashing a statue of the Virgin Mary is apparently now Syria's defense minister. Okay. Now, when I say apparently, because I can't really make out 100% if that's the same guy. I've seen this video before actually, but it's so shocking. But it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, right? So it doesn't really change anything I just said, because this is the same behavior that Jolani encouraged among his troops, among his men, whether he was in ISIS or whether he was in Al-Qaeda. So, I mean, whether this guy's the defense minister or not, you can be sure 100% that all of the people with cabinet positions in Syria now have the same beliefs as this. And it's such a, it's how the mighty have fallen, basically. That's really the only thing that you can say.
Subhanahu wa ta'ala, لن يعبد بأرض الشام سوى الله ولن يقم إلا حكم الله ولن يعبد الجبت والطاغوت في أرض الشام بعد هذه الأيام بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. لا نرضى بغير الله ودين الله وسنة نبي محمد بن عبد الله.
Again.
So you tell me if that's the same person in the photograph, but I just want to be very clear about something. I think most people, whether they're in Syria or outside Syria, would be pretty disgusted by that, honestly. What's really ironic is that if you read the Quran, actually, Mary is mentioned in there more times than I can even remember, and is held in very, very, very high regard in Islam. So actually what he's doing, he's quoting scripture and pretending to, that like he's smashing an idol or something. That's really not what's going on. It's extraordinarily hypocritical and offensive. And I don't want you to get a misconception or get the wrong idea that this guy represents, or that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Jolani and these people represent how, most Sunni Muslims feel in Syria. I don't think that's the case. Half the people that you see online in independent media that are talking about Syria are Sunni themselves, and they know what's going on. They know Israel is behind all of this, and they speak the truth. So as a matter of fact, someone from Syria came up to me a few months ago, and they watched my show. They recognized me, and I didn't ask, of course, and it's kind of ironic because it's so meta, but this was just after, I think, just after December, so when Jolani came to power, and he was just agreeing with me basically that it used to be rude in Syria, or considered rude to even ask someone what they are. And of course I didn't ask, right? But he said himself that he's Sunni. So, we have the same politics or same beliefs or same viewpoints and memories, and saw and lived the same things in Syria. So, that goes to show you that it's not about, empires need to use divide and conquer and sectarianism to achieve their goals. That's why they employ people like this, like the guy I just showed you in the video smashing, the Virgin Mary, because they need that sectarian strife to cause internal division, and then it's much easier for them to take over a country that's fighting between itself, or fighting, people fighting amongst each other, than if everyone is united as one front against you, right? That's the whole mentality behind Western imperialism, and not just only Western imperialism. It's, many empires have used this in the past. But we are in a period of history right now where, yes, it's predominantly the West that's doing it, and has been doing it for the last hundreds of years. So Sykes-Picot, Balfour Declaration, and beyond. And not even just in the Middle East, but across Africa as well, and so on, and Asia. So, this is something that needs to be noted. But you should also remember that it's not just the West supporting this; it's the Israelis. I mean, like Syrian Girl's pointing out here. I mean, the amount of support that Israel has given these people, from medical assistance to logistics to supplies to intelligence to weapons to who knows what else, right? It's staggering. It's staggering, and it speaks volumes that Israel. You can see the former head of the Mossad, the Israeli Foreign Intelligence Service, speaking on Al Jazeera, and he says that he would ally himself any day. I mean, I'm paraphrasing right now, yeah, but his sentiment is basically that he would ally himself or give medical assistance any day to an Al-Qaeda fighter over a Palestinian fighter, right? Which speaks volumes. And I'll show you this video of the U.S. or former U.S. ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, and what he had to say about Jolani. This is a recent video, actually. I think it's from last month. And, I think it's a fair assessment to say that he has blood on his hands.
Starting in 2023, a British non-government organization, which specializes in conflict resolution, invited me to help them bring this guy out of the terrorist world and into regular politics. And at first, I have to tell you, I was very leery of going. I sort of had images of me in an orange jumpsuit with a knife to my throat. But after talking to several people who had gone in, and one of whom had met him, I decided to take the chance. And so the first time I met him, this guy's name is nom de guerre was Abdulkader Jolani, but his actual name is Ahmed Shara, which he only revealed to the world after he captured Damascus in the Blitzkrieg of December 2024, about 5 months ago. First time I met him, I sat down next to him, and I'm literally as close as I am.
I love how he speaks about this guy like he's meeting kind of like an asylum patient or something. Like, it's so normal. It's just another day at the office. Like, fuck.
To Roy, and I said, this is all in Arabic. I said, never in a million years could I imagine that I would be sitting next to you, long beard,
really,
in fatigues. And
I can bloody well imagine it, mate. And I think we suspected this all along.
He looked at me, he speaks very softly. And he said, Wallah Anna, me neither. And we went on and actually had a pretty...
No, Wallah Anna, not Wallah Anna. That's completely different. But yeah, whatever. I'm giving him shit for his Arabic. It's really not my main concern.
Civil conversation. I share this because he said something which really piqued my interest. He never apologized for the terrorist attacks in Iraq or in Syria, although there were many fewer in Syria. Never apologized. But he also said, now I am governing an opposition-held area of northwest Syria, and I am learning that the tactics and the principles that I was following in Iraq do not apply when you actually have to govern 4 million people. And they had 2 million residents of that area of Syria, and then another 2 million refugees who had come there from other parts of Syria. So they had a population of 4 million. He said, I am learning that to govern, You have to make compromises. I was very struck by that. So that was in March 2023, just over.
Jesus, I mean, this is like
Disgusting.
he's talking about someone who decapitates people and you know, kidnaps nuns and
a bunch of American
murders Syrians, Iraqis, Lebanese. What is like what his voice is so soft. Yeah, okay, I don't care about his voice or his, you know, anatomy and physical features. I think that's bloody irrelevant. And then he talks about the fact he doesn't apologize for the terrorist attacks like it's a good thing. Oh, how honorable. He's so good. You know, he believes in what he did. I feel like I'm losing my mind when I watch this, you know. And remember, this is Robert Ford, so he used to be the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Syria. Okay, in other words, what do embassies do? You all know the answer. I wouldn't be surprised if he's CIA. I mean, does it matter if he's even CIA? Does it really matter? I think that speech by itself, I couldn't care less which department of the government he works for. It's just the speech is problematic. You know, there's so much wrong with it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken as well, he was walking with people in the streets, which is something that U.S. ambassadors fucking love to do, which is really faux pas. Yeah, faux pas. So he was going out on the street and protesting with people against the government that gave him his diplomatic accreditation and is hosting him and giving him security. And then you'll see the U.S. ambassador in Lebanon do the same thing. Or, you know, the U.S. ambassador in Russia to Moscow will do the same thing. And I think he posted directions for like a protest or something. Mad people, really mad people. You're not supposed to go against the government that it gives you accreditation and hosts you. Okay. Anyway, so you know, this did happen, this terrorist attack, and the same people that have been behaving like this are now running Syria. It doesn't look or bode well for Christians. It doesn't bode well for anyone, frankly. It doesn't.
Christians are being hunted down and massacred across Syria. Did you know that? Are you aware of this story? Probably not, because the mainstream media won't cover this story for some reason. I don't know why.
Like they put Al Qaeda in power and ISIS in power, and Trump sat down with them with the Saudis.
This is happening around the world, but right now in Syria, it is most acute. Over the weekend, 1 hour after this church service, look at these little kids carrying up the candles on the staff here. These little kids, one of them carrying the cross. All of these folks here in this church service at St. Elias Church in Damascus. So this was 1 hour prior to this church being attacked and massacred.
I warned them they would do this. These people are very devious. You know, when you hear about Damascus, us who grew up in church reading the Bible, we know about Damascus. You know, we know about these ancient cities and how people used to walk the streets in these ancient cities. These are the same people doing this shit. They done this to our people. That's how they replaced our people with other people. But to make people flee, you got to kill them in every section of the Middle East, like they've been doing.
Occurred. 30 people killed inside of this church.
Dozens injured. Dozens in the first ISIS-style bombing since Syria has toppled and been ruled by former ISIS leader.
Syrian journalist Kavor Almassian, he himself a practicing Christian Orthodox, is joining us now to analyze this. So Kavor, this is not just an isolated incident. I mean, I think, I don't know why the mainstream media around the world, they're just ignoring this story, Christians being hunted down. But this isn't just an isolated incident, is it?
Thank you very much, Clayton and Natalie, for having me. At the introduction, you mentioned that the mainstream media doesn't cover this case because, for a simple reason, for 14 years, they promoted for this outcome. They promoted for a regime change, and they promoted for the chaos which was unleashed after the regime change in the country. So they don't want to hold themselves responsibility, and they don't want to tell their audience that they have lied to their audience about the nature of the conflict in the country. Now, this type of attacks were anticipated since the regime change happened. happened, and even before that. For 14 years, the Christians came under attacks, targeted attacks by the Al-Qaeda forces in the country, backed, sponsored, funded, and trained by different regional intelligence apparatuses, and also the CIA, which played a major role in this. And this led into driving 90% of the Christians out of Syria. Now, in the neighboring countries of Syria, such as in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in Turkey, Western NGOs established offices there saying that we are here to save the Christians from persecution. So what they do, basically, they drove the Christians to the neighboring countries, and from the neighboring countries, they absorbed them into some of the Western countries, such as in Australia and in Canada. But this was some sort of, in my opinion, a soft ethnic cleansing of the Christians after unleashing this type of brutal war in the country. Now that only 10% of the Christians left in the country, now we're witnessing another type of targeted attacks against them after they came after the Alawites, the Kurds, the Druze. Now they're coming after the Christians. So sending suicide bombers into a church, blowing it up completely, killing the worshippers there. And this act of intimidation, of course, only aims at driving the rest of the Christians out of Syria, because the ideology that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who is now the self-selected president of Syria, goes back at least 800 years from now. And
they doing this all throughout Africa. These same people, these same individuals exporting them terrorists to Africa. When you see these people kidnapping the girls in Nigeria, the Boko Haram, when you see them, they doing this in Kenya, they doing this in Somalia, the Al-Shabaab, the people who doing this in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, these are all the same people.
And he believes in the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, and Ibn Taymiyyah believes that first, this Al-Qaeda ideology, people should purify their own domestic house from the minority Islamic sects. And when they are done with them, they have to come after the Christians, after the Jews, and after other religions. So this is just a logical, in my opinion, development, what is happening in the country after installing a person who personally believes in this. And the evidence and the proof of it is when the terrorist attack happened and 30 people were killed inside the church, Jolani issued a statement. And he said he expresses solidarity with the victims of these attacks, and he called the attack a criminal explosion. Now, this is different from a previous administration in Syria, which used to call such attacks terrorist attack. So Jolani doesn't even dare to call an attack against the Christian community in the country a terrorist attack, because he himself administered and he sponsored this type of attacks in Iraq. He was the one who used to build car bombs and send them into the Shia communities, into the Christian neighborhoods, and blow them up in their neighborhoods. Now that he's the president of the country, he cannot just walk back and say this is a terrorist attack, while he did the same thing 20 years ago in Iraq in order to start a civil war there.
But again, he said that was just a phase, you know, like when I had bangs. Exactly.
He reformed.
Yes. And back in March, we discussed the 900 Alawite civilians who were massacred under his watch. And he released this statement that he announced the formation of a fact-finding committee regarding these events. What happened when I asked you about this? You gave us a guttural laugh. That was your response to it. So is there anything that came of this fact-finding other than it's happening?
Actually, the numbers exceed the 10,000 Alawites who were slaughtered by his regime. And he formed a committee saying that he will investigate the case. And he gave 3 months for the committee to conclude the investigation. After 3 months, he extended it another 3 months. So we are now in the 5th month and nothing came out yet, which means when you are the ruler of a country and you're giving time after time after time for militants to commit such atrocities, you're basically tacitly and openly, you're encouraging them to continue this type of atrocities against the religious and ethnic minorities in the country. Nowadays, I receive daily messages and phone calls from friends, colleagues, family in Syria. They're all desperate. They don't know what to do. And most of the people who are stuck now in the country, they are from the poorer classes in the country. They don't have any means to leave the country and go, let's say, to another place or to relocate or pay a smuggler to come to Europe. And ironically enough, if you remember the big refugee crisis in Europe in 2015 and 2016, and back then all European countries opened their doors. And now where are the European countries from the Christians of Syria? Why aren't they receiving refugees or give them any protection after now that they are the ones targeted by these terrorist attacks? We don't see any politician in Europe or in the West talking about it. We don't see the mainstream media is talking about it. But I personally urge at least Greece and other countries who have an invested interest in the Greek Orthodox community in the country to at least give them temporary protection in their own countries before the situation gets better. Because from the current moment, from what I see, what is happening in the country, that there is a persistent attempt to cleanse the country from the infidels and from those who call them like they have deviated from the rules of God. Therefore, the Christians who don't have any militias to protect themselves, they don't have any political power, they don't have a political party, and they don't have any regional power on their back, they are left alone in the country. They have no one basically to back them, support them, and assist them in the security, because trusting Jolani in this case is very delusional and it's very dangerous, because he's the same guy who is sending cars to the Christian neighborhoods, and they put big microphones and big speakers and calling the Christians to convert to Islam or to their ideology. And after all these incidences happening and provocations against the Christians, now that it ended up with a terrorist attack, now Christians going to the streets and calling for justice, and they're protesting against the Jolani regime. But be sure that these type of protests will lead to further persecution and prosecution of the Christians in Syria, because Jolani is not tolerant towards such, this type of, for example, protests against Jolani, because they say we reject this type of terrorism and we reject the foreign fighters. Clayton and Natalie, you know that we have thousands and thousands and thousands of multinational Takfiri terrorists in Syria, and when the Syrian regime was asked, what are you going to do about them? They said, they helped us in the revolution, so we have to settle them in the country. And he wants to give them Syrian citizenship, and he has given them senior positions in the Syrian army. So we have people from Chechnya, we have people from Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, we have people from Pakistan, and one of the suicide bombers was from Pakistan, who blew up himself in a Syrian church. And President Trump, he agreed on this plan, because otherwise, what are they going to do with these thousands of jihadists in Syria if they're going to send them back to their own countries or probably relocate them to other places? These people are very anarchic, they are very terroristic, they are very radical. Wherever they go, they could wreak havoc. Therefore, they decided to settle them in Syria, give them Syrian citizenship, and let everyone forget about it. And now these multinational Takfiris are blowing themselves up among the Christian communities.
Take a look at this headline from DW.com. Attack on Christians. And again, this is just how the mainstream media portrays this. Attack on Christians threatens Syria's post-war cohesion. And I'll read you the byline, which says, Syria's new president has promised to replace the Assad dictatorship with a multi-religious society where all faiths are represented. Sunday's terror attack in Damascus shows us how much work remains to be done. So the mainstream media is, of course, spinning at the, Syria's new president has promised to replace the Assad dictatorship with a multi-religious society. It's going to be
who funds this outlet? Who funds this outlet, Clayton? Is the German government. This is not even an independent outlet. They are funded by the foreign ministry of Germany, and they tell them exactly how to report about these cases. And one of the first European foreign ministers who flew to Damascus trying to shake hands with Jolani was the former foreign minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, whose ministry funds this outlet. Now that she's out of power, it's still the same. Faces change, but similar people come to power, and they're still funding this type of mainstream media outlets, and they're trying to create a perception that there is a chance, let's give him a chance. What is he going to do? The truth of the matter is they accepted Jolani because he said, I will not attack Israel. I will break the axis of resistance. I will seal the borders with Hezbollah. I will make life easier for Israel in the region, and I will normalize ties with them. I will condemn Iran, and I will not condemn Israel. So everybody was excited about him when he came to power. And that's what he's basically doing. He is reorienting the geopolitical posture of Syria, let's say, from pro-Russia, pro-Iran, pro-BRICS, into pro-NATO and pro-WEF position, for example. And accordingly, everybody accepted him. If he kills all the Christians in Syria, there is no problem about that. Who is shedding crocodile tears now on the Christians in Iraq? 90% of them were also driven out of their country after the 2003 war. And nobody speaks about them now after 20 years. And similar thing will happen to the Syrian Christians in 10 years and 20 years. Everybody will forget about them because other countries will absorb these Christians into their countries. And the story is done. And the goal of the regime change war has been materialized. This is the main issue. It is about geopolitics and finances and money, and it has nothing to do about human rights. If Jolani is committing atrocities or violating human rights, it's okay. He's their ally.
Now, so what next? Because in the past, we've talked about, I mean, Syrians were protected under Assad, and you and I kind of felt like, well, if the United States gets out of Syria, that was sort of the way of things. But now the United States is saying, well, with Jolani, we're going to sort of put a lease on it, like make it so it was always okay and it's in arrears. And so then it seems like that's just going to be the way it is. The United States will keep a small presence there. Jolani's going to stay. I don't see any, what's going to happen? I don't see any like, let's hope for this at all.
Yeah. The U.S. Army is finalizing a long-term deal with Jolani to stay in the country permanently for a long time. They want to stay in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, where most of the oil and the gas is, because American companies are going to extract this oil, process them, recycle them, and sell them, of course. So it's a big profit for them. And the American soldiers, boots on the ground, are going to be protectors, basically, of these oil fields. And their proxies, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces there, because what the Americans want to do is to create spheres of influence in the country on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, which is 1/3 of the country, where the American occupation forces are located. They are going to receive now a legitimacy from the current regime in Damascus, so they stay there for the sake of the oil and the gas. And the rest of the country can screw itself because they don't have much of natural resources. They don't have the food basket. They don't have the carbohydrates. They can just continue living under Jolani. And this is where Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, basically, they are endorsing this Jolani rule because he's the one who is going to make the shift. This is a historic shift. Since World War II, since the end of World War II, and since the independence of Syria, we have had over probably 13 or 14 different presidents and leaders in the country, and none of them succeeded or managed or wanted to reorient Syria on the side of the transatlantic alliance. And this is what Jolani was tasked to do, and that is why they accepted him to come to power. And this is great news for the transatlantic movement in alliance in the Middle East, because now that with this conflict between Iran, war between Iran and Israel, they have now an open airspace over Syria. Therefore, the Israeli forces can fly over the Syrian airspace and bomb Iran on the borders with Iraq. Before that, under Assad, he closed his airspace, and since 2018, the Israeli fighter jets didn't dare to penetrate the Syrian airspace because of the complicated and sophisticated Syrian airspace. But once Jolani came to power, Israel destroyed all the air defenses of Syria, and Jolani basically inherited the militia. He doesn't have any army, he doesn't have tanks, he doesn't have artilleries or air force or air defenses. Therefore, they have given him, let's say, you know how Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank rules. He has a militia and he has a police station there. This is how he's ruling over the neck of the Syrians, basically, who are unarmed, and they don't have any protection from anyone. That's why the future is very, very, very dire. And we're speaking about Syria. We're speaking about Palestine. Those places are the birthplace of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ walked through the streets of this neighborhood. And therefore, it has a very big historical and cultural and religious significance, something that if it's wiped out from Syria, it could also lead into another domino effect to other regions, to countries that their leaders claim that they're Christians. So if you're a Christian and if you care about the future of Christianity, you should not only just make noise about the victims. No, we have to lobby and pressure against this type of catastrophic policies coming from whether Washington or Tel Aviv, regime change, destruction, chaos, and then create a vacuum for these ISIS and Al-Qaeda types to take over, just like they did in Iraq. And now they wanted to copy it in Iran. But in Iran, they say, no, it's different in Iran. This time is different in Iran. It's not going to be like in Syria or in Iraq. But I would say it would be worse, because 92 million people live in Iran. And there are multiple different ethnic and religious groups in Iran. So if you create a power vacuum, and if there is a mistrust or there is a security event in the country, everybody will start protecting itself, carrying arms, fighting against each other. So how many refugees could create this out of 92 million people? To all these influencers in the United States who say, we don't want refugees, we don't want migrants, but every time there are the drums of war, they join it and they want to attack another country. And they create the same problems that they say that they don't want to face or address in their own countries. That's ridiculous, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's shocking when we go in and destabilize a country like Somalia, and then suddenly we wind up with all kinds of Somalian refugees, or Iraq, then we have all sorts of Iraqi refugees. It's amazing how that happens, and they pour into our country. You Christians are under attack. I mean, I saw a study today, 1 out of every 7 basically being persecuted around the world right now. And the story, for whatever reason, just not getting any coverage in the mainstream media. So you have to come to alternative media, like what Kavor does at Syriana Analysis, or what we do here at Redacted. So Kavor, thank you so much for your courage. Thank you for your brilliance. One of the few, I mean, really one of the great Syrian voices that we can turn to get the truth about this. Thank you, Kavor.
The Iranian military has arrested a record-breaking number of Mossad agents across the country days after the ceasefire that appears to be largely holding. The arrest is one of its kind in the history of counterintelligence operations in Iran. It involved the nabbing of over 700 agents specifically accused of smuggling drones and explosives into the country. Iran's counterintelligence operations might have explained the reason why Israel was severely powerless to inflict a Lebanon-style Mossad shocker on Iran. The Iranian military intelligence unit was so activated that they carefully dismantled the CIA Mossad structure and effectively made Israel powerless and toothless. According to report, the Islamic Republic early this morning executed 3 people it accused of collaborating with Israel. Those executed were named as Idris Ali, Azad Shojai, and Rasul Ahmad Rasul, saying they smuggled equipment used in the assassination of one unnamed person. The men were arrested and tried for cooperation favoring the Israeli regime, and the sentence was carried out this morning after they were hanged. Kindly take a moment to like and share this video to boost its visibility. The arrests spanned provinces like Kermanshah, Isfahan, Khuzestan, Fars, and Loristan, with significant operations in Tehran, where over 10,000 small drones were seized. In Alborz province, 2 agents were caught with explosives and electronic devices, while in Ray, near Tehran, authorities dismantled a clandestine drone bomb factory, confiscating 200 kilos of explosives, 23 drones, and suicide drone components. In Hamadan, 30 individuals were detained, and in Urmia, 3 alleged Mossad agents were executed for smuggling assassination equipment. These operations, led by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and Iran's Ministry of Information and National Security, also uncovered Spike anti-tank guided missiles, micro-drones, and communication equipment, indicating a sophisticated network aimed at sabotage and targeted killings. Meanwhile, the scale of the arrests suggests Israel's network was far more extensive than previously acknowledged, relying on local collaborators, foreign operatives, and advanced technology to infiltrate Iran's defenses. Iranian state media reported that the detained included individuals accused of providing strategic site locations, personnel details, and technical support to Mossad, with some meeting Israeli agents abroad. The execution of Majid Mosayebi in Isfahan on June 16th, followed by 3 others in Urmia, underscored Iran's resolve to punish alleged collaborators harshly, with judiciary officials vowing swift trials. Codes on X echoed this narrative, with one user claiming 36 Mossad and Ukrainian agents were among those arrested, alongside a cybersecurity cell and trucks of explosives. Iran's success in this crackdown reflects its enhanced counterintelligence capabilities. The IRGC and Basiji paramilitary forces spearheaded operations, leveraging local intelligence and surveillance to identify Mossad networks. The seizure of over 1,000 drones, explosives, and anti-tank missiles suggests Iran had been tracking these networks for months, possibly tipped off by prior arrests or defections. By neutralizing these networks, Iran not only prevented further attacks, but also sent a message to Israel and its allies that its internal security apparatus remains robust. We concluded that dismantling the network inside Iran forced Netanyahu's hand toward a ceasefire. With no more operatives on the ground, he was left with only airstrikes, and those always triggered devastating retaliation from Iran.
Israel will provoke, and it is the job of the United States, when in rare moments presidents do their job, to keep the foot on the brake. And this morning, Trump unusually chastised Israel in a post saying, "Do not drop that bomb." Well, actually, that's his job. It's pretty interesting. He did it this time. Yesterday was different. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Pretty closely aligned with the Islamic cause, obviously, and with Iran, and absolutely able to transfer nuclear weapons. North Korea is another case. And I think that's an important point, by the way, because we've been told that the be-all and end-all is Iran's enrichment of uranium. That is not the true issue at stake here. The true issue at stake is Israel vulnerable by its own actions to a nuclear attack on Israel? The answer is yes. Does Israel create more security for itself the way that it operates? My answer is no. It makes Israel more and more dangerous. Not only did we see, obviously, that the Iron Dome ain't so iron, and that there were easily, it was not hard to penetrate the air defenses in Israel. But Israel seems to think that Iran is the end of the story, and it is not the end of the story. There are 57 countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that are absolutely dead set against what Israel is doing. The vast majority of the world is dead set against it. When you ask about Russia and China, it is their fundamental purpose not to be thrown under the bus of the United States. This is the basic point. They want a multipolar world, not a U.S.-dominated world. And they are succeeding in that because the U.S. does not have the means, the power, in my view, the interest, but put that aside, the means or the power to make a U.S.-dominated world, despite what Washington has believed for more than 30 years. So Russia and China are careful. China's very precise. I think it's a cliche, but it's also true that Russia plays chess, China plays Go, and the United States plays poker. One hand at a time, very quick, not any long-term strategy, just go for the hand. And I think that China and Russia bided their time in the first days. But the point was, really, Iran was not decapitated and with regime change, nor was it stopped in its ability to do great damage inside Israel up until the very last moment, which really irks the Israelis that it was the last exchange of missiles in this case was Iran's. And then Israel tried to violate the timeline and launch another one so it could be last. And that's when Trump said, no, stop. We already have an understanding about the chronology. So we are watching step by step the emerging of a true multipolar world where other powers that don't love the United States, they don't hate it, by the way, they just don't want to be subservient.
The arrests and executions are not just a tactical setback. They are deep, systemic failure that has shattered the illusion of Israeli supremacy in intelligence warfare. For decades, Mossad was mythologized as an untouchable ghost force, able to strike anywhere without consequence. Netanyahu basked in this mythology, using every assassination, every explosion, every cyber attack on Iranian infrastructure as a political prop. He turned espionage into theater, but in doing so, he underestimated Iran's resilience, its vast counterintelligence web, and its strategic patience. Iran, rather than responding rashly, worked methodically, studying Mossad's patterns, tracking its operatives, and ultimately springing a trap that has left Israeli intelligence agencies scrambling in disarray. This is more than a symbolic blow. It's a crippling dent in Israel's intelligence network that will take years to rebuild, if it ever does. These were not just random informants. Many were highly embedded operatives who held sensitive access and were relied upon for real-time information about Iran's nuclear and military programs. Their capture exposes the weakness of Israel's human intelligence strategy and confirms that Iranian counterintelligence has matured into a formidable force. That alone should terrify Netanyahu's military establishment, which has grown complacent behind the myth of its own invincibility. And let's not forget the political ramifications. Netanyahu has staked his career on being tough on Iran, painting himself as the man who can keep Israeli citizens safe from what he calls the Iranian threat. But what has that approach yielded? A region more volatile than ever, Israeli embassies on alert across the globe, and now a wave of humiliating arrests inside Iran that show Netanyahu's hawkish approach has backfired spectacularly. His desperation to provoke war while ignoring the cost of escalation has not only destabilized the region, it's exposed Israel's fragility. There's a brutal irony to all this. Netanyahu believed he could manipulate the shadow war with Iran to distract from his corruption trials, internal dissent, and political instability at home. But as the bodies of captured spies return in silence, and as Iran turns the tables with confidence, it becomes clearer by the day. It is Netanyahu, not Tehran, who is losing this war. The so-called mastermind of Israeli security has turned out to be the architect of its most humiliating exposure. And in the world of espionage, exposure is defeat.
The Iranian IRGC Quds Force commander Ismail Qani has earlier today appeared publicly at celebrations in Tehran, dispelling earlier wartime reports he'd been killed in an Israeli airstrike.
Now, this is very humiliating for Donald Trump.
Earlier media reports had suggested that Qani was amongst
They
the
said they
military
killed the
leaders
leader
killed in
of the
Israeli
Al-Quds
strikes, although
force.
the IDF had not claimed.
Iranians let them believe that the whole 12 days. Yeah, you killed a couple of generals. Now, I have seen 4 of those people still alive. Every day they probably release one video of them as heroes. This is psychological drama. Israel don't know who they killed. They just went on TV and lied like Trump. Now, you said this man was dead. What is this man doing walking around Iran? They definitely went on the news saying he was dead, hugging people. I guess this is his clone, right?
Claimed to have targeted him. All right, this is an interesting development. An Iranian Quds Force soldier surfacing in Tehran, Aditya, amidst media reports that he is dead?
Well, absolutely. As per the media report, this quid soldier boy has been, dead, but
they could expose him the next day. You said you killed him, cool. Watch it. All right, he's dead. After it's all over, then the man come out. Man was steady busy. Trump said they killed him.
Now, the videos of his, being alive are circulating on social media. So, this is very apparent, because, these forces, however, the Israeli Defense Forces did claim that they eliminated him, but now, the videos of him, coming, being alive is coming to the fore. So now it needs to be seen how the Israeli side reacts to this. Yes, Sudha.
What the hell just happened? I mean, I really wish I knew. Donald Trump's been nominated by Israel, the much coveted endorsement by Israel for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, I'm not making that up. Donald Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize for stopping a war that he started. Israel was pulverized by Iran, especially in the last few days of the 12-day war, according to President Donald Trump. 11,000 buildings were destroyed by Iranian ballistic missiles, and over 30,000 were damaged. The skies over Tel Aviv were effectively unguarded, undefended, especially in the last few days. The air defenses of Israel were degraded to the extent that they asked for the ceasefire. They asked for it through their good friend Qatar, which denounced the breach of their sovereignty by their neighbor Iran. Nothing screams sovereignty like a foreign military base on your soil launching bombing attacks on your neighbor against your will, or at least as against the will you publicly stated. It is a state of absolute confusion, and it's not over yet. It's not over that yet in Gaza, that is for sure. Israel lost 7 soldiers with 11 critically wounded just yesterday in the Gaza Strip. The cracks that are appearing in the Israeli polity are such that people are openly now asking, what on earth are we continuing to fight for in Gaza? And the slaughter continues at the food aid distribution sites. People, 25, 40, 50 every day, are gathering to be fed, much like the Jews in the death camps of the Holocaust gathered to be washed in a shower, only to find that they were being showered by Zyklon B gas, which murdered them. The Palestinians are gathering for a piece of bread, and the people who gathered them there are killing them with tank shells and with bombs. The state of affairs inside Israel is mirrored in New York City. Israel has been defeated twice in 2 days, once in the war with Iran and a second time in the Democratic primary election in New York City, where AIPAC, where the lobby, where Bloomberg, where every billionaire, trillionaire in America threw everything they could to stop the left-wing Muslim candidate Zohran Mamdani from winning the Democratic nomination, and were absolutely crushed. Mamdani is the Democratic Party candidate in November for mayor of New York City. How about that then? The Israelis could scarcely contain their grief, and they're not finished in New York either. They will try to group behind another candidate, maybe the incumbent mayor, whose disgrace was such that he didn't even run in the Democratic Party candidate, but is running again for mayor. Or maybe they'll go for Lander, the Republican candidate. One way or another, it's not over yet, but the victory of an avowedly hostile, pro-Palestinian as mayor of New York City, where there are more Jews than in any city in the world outside of Tel Aviv, means one of two things. It means that almost all of the non-Jewish people in New York City voted for Mamdani, or much more likely, it means that from amongst the Jewish community themselves, Israel fatigue has well and truly sunk in. And these were its first fruits at the ballot box. And the same will be true in the midterms. Anybody who wants to run in the midterm elections on the line of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris towards the Israel-Palestine conflict is doomed to defeat. And that goes for Republicans as much as it goes for Democrats. But back to the war itself. The sanest voice that I have heard is the one that we've got coming up as our first guest this evening, Professor Said Mohammed Marandi, as always, telling the truth, seeking to enlighten and not to propagandize. He said, I'm not saying Iran won a decisive victory over America and Israel. I'm not saying that it was a clear-cut victory, but Iran had the upper hand at the end. And no one, if they're being truthful, can seriously doubt that. In the last few hours, before the ceasefire took effect, a two-tier ceasefire where Iran had to stop firing before Israel stopped firing, a whole lot of damage was done. Many people were killed. A whole lot of buildings were destroyed in the capital of Tehran in a last frenzied effort to assassinate anybody of importance that they could possibly get their hands on. But it didn't mask the fundamental truth that strategically Israel has suffered an historic defeat, because nobody ever, not Nasser, not the 1973 war, not anybody, anywhere, anytime, has ever struck inside the 1948 borders of Israel with the precision and the power that Iran, night after night after night, pulverized Tel Aviv, Haifa, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and all these strategic centers. Beersheba, never forget Beersheba. The Iranian ballistic missiles were uncontested by the end. Despite that mutt, that punch bag, Piers Morgan, who was knocked around the ring by the lightweight lady, Candace Owens, last night. I mean, lightweight only physically, of course. She sent from God a voice of clarion, clarity, and truthfulness. She beat Piers Morgan up. He told me when I was last on his show that only one or two Iranian missiles had managed to get through the Israeli defenses. Well, those one or two certainly did a lot of damage. No, it's never happened before. All these Arab countries, all these Muslim countries, with all their armies, their navies, and their air forces, with all the missiles that they buy, all the bombs that they buy as protection money from the United States of America, none of them have ever landed one punch on Israel, no matter how many Palestinians it was slaughtering. But Iran landed hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles, some of them hypersonic ballistic missiles, which landed right on the nose of their target, in the end, uncontested. This changes forever the narrative so far as Israel is concerned. They are no longer the invincible superpower of the Middle East. Iran can now rival them at any point in time. Now, of course, Israel will rebuild. It will seek to, like a little Zelensky, sneak around the NATO powers, looking for replacement munitions, replacement air defense systems. Of course they will. But Iran will be retooling and restocking also. And finally, China and Russia have arrived on the field in that regard. So by the time of the next round, Israel will have recovered some of its strength, but Iran, which finished stronger, will have recovered much of its also, and maybe then more some. What about the nuclear material? Well, of course, the nuclear question was a ruse to begin with. Iran is religiously, by fatwa, precluded from developing weapons of mass destruction, even though weapons of mass destruction supplied by us were used against them, including against Professor Marandi, who was twice attacked by gas supplied by Western countries during the Iraq-Iran war. So nobody, not any intelligence service anywhere, including, crucially, that of the United States, has ever claimed that Iran has built a nuclear war, against my advice, as you already know. So the issue of nuclear was always a device, a ruse, a deceit to manufacture consent in Western countries for the role that their governments wanted to play in the attack on Iran. It's always been about regime change. They've been trying to change the regime in Iran since it was founded. For 45 years, they have been trying to regime change in Tehran. But it has all failed. They've tried everything. They've tried sanctions that would make your eyes water, your eyes bleed. They've tried assassinations. They've tried terrorism. They've recruited gangs of Kurdish mercenaries, lunatic mercenaries in the MEK based in Albania, a bizarre cult led by a woman whose husband disappeared but has never been acknowledged to be dead. Maybe he's in a cupboard somewhere. They have recruited all kinds of people, Afghans, Indians, by the score, by the hundreds, to sabotage and to reconnaissance for acts of terrorism. And then finally, a few weeks ago, they openly declared war. In a sneak attack, Israel murdered scores of commanders in another shocking Iranian display of unpreparedness. How many of their leaders are going to be killed by Israeli terrorists and Israeli-backed terrorists? But Iran recovered. It showed the systemic depth of the Iranian government, that they were able to recover from that first shock blow when so many of their top people were murdered, and come back fighting, to the extent that Donald Trump himself and Bannon, his vicar on earth, explicitly stated this ceasefire was for Israel. It was Israel that was taking a horrific battering by the end of the war. So there's nobody doubting, I think, who finished stronger. The only doubt is where the nuclear material is. Now, the IAEA, if the Iranians have any sense, will never again step foot in their country after Iranian procured documents proved that the IAEA was spying for Israel, spying on the plants themselves, spying on the enriched material and reporting it directly back to Israel, but crucially, spying on the scientists who were then later murdered. Their names, their pictures, their addresses were all given to the people who murdered them. So the IAEA is a busted flush. As predictably, we ought to have seen it from the start. When on the eve of the war, in the midnight hours, they delivered a report, a false report, that Iran had somehow gone off the reservation on the nuclear question was evidence enough. But now that we know the role the IAEA have been playing, it's unlikely that any of them will ever set foot in an Iranian nuclear plant again. So we'll never know what happened to the enriched uranium, 600 kilograms of it. We'll never know if more is being enriched. We'll never know if Iran will follow the Israeli plan of strategic ambiguity, never telling anyone whether they have the bomb or not. Why not? It's worked for Israel. For 40 years, Israel has illegally held maybe hundreds of nuclear weapons without allowing a single inspection by anyone of their nuclear material. So if it's good enough for Israel, it's surely good enough for Iran. And this line was endorsed, quite importantly, by Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who poured scorn on the IAEA, and they're now bleating about the whereabouts of Iran's nuclear material. My last point is this. This isn't over. Netanyahu isn't over. In fact, he knows if he doesn't get back into the war game pretty damn quickly, he might be out of office, given the shattering blow that all of this has been to the Israeli political system. So I believe that Israel will continue its low-grade and maybe high-grade attacks against the Islamic Republic in Iran. And that can be withstood by the Iranian system. They could trade tit for tat sporadically in exchange for attacks one on the other. Question is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is now so uncontrollable that it would not surprise anyone if this very evening, having declared the nuclear question closed, having described Iran's nuclear capability as being obliterated, destroyed by the finest dambuster raid since the Second World War, having praised and heaped praise on 20-year-old pilots who in the dead of the night conducted a military raid of such precision and power that we should all stand agog at their brilliance. It would not surprise me if Donald Trump this evening tweeted that he'd decided to go back like a dog returning to its own vomit. It would not surprise me at all if, stung by the criticism of the scum of CNN, of the failing New York Times, Trump was somehow persuaded to do it all over again. I'm sorry that I cannot bring you more positive or optimistic news, and it would please me greatly if I could hail a great Iranian victory, a great and strategic Israeli defeat, but I cannot. I can only say that in round one, Iran finished the stronger. It's all coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows, Professor Marandi, up next. Stay a period of more than 2 weeks. People all over the world look out for you, pray for you, and look forward to hearing your analysis of what has been happening and, crucially, what might happen next. Thanks for joining us. My takeaway is that this is not over yet. Is it yours?
As always, I agree with you, George. I don't think this is over. The Zionist regime, as long as it continues to exist, as long as it is an ethno-supremacist regime that sees the rest of humanity as subhuman, there will never be peace in this region. And they will never tolerate the people of the region standing up against this barbaric genocide and this barbaric ethnic cleansing that we're now seeing in the West Bank, taking on new dimensions. So I agree, Iran won round one, despite the blitzkrieg attack and the murder of many commanders and senior officials and the slaughter of so many innocent people, neighbors, families, children and grandchildren of these commanders and these scientists and these academics that were targeted. And it's interesting that after they had murdered all these people and their neighbors and their families, because they take out whole apartment buildings to kill one person. And Western media would glorify their actions and call it a intelligence coup, whereas it was just crude murder being carried out against people whose homes and families were, it was clear to everyone where they were and where they lived. But Iran regrouped, the armed forces struck back, the Iranian people, most importantly, they rallied, and the Iranians today, George, are more united than I've ever seen in my life. And it is like during the Saddam Hussein invasion, the Western-backed Saddam Hussein invasion against Iran. The unity that I see today reminds me of the unity that we saw in the 1980s.
Now, Donald Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize for stopping the war. We'll come to that in a minute. But he started the war. He started it actually before America got involved. He must have green-lighted Netanyahu's sneak attack on Iran. Indeed, having claimed it was not his war, when he thought it was successful, he claimed credit for it. He claimed that they were operating as a team. We mustn't forget that point, mustn't we?
Absolutely not. I think he may probably get the Nobel Peace Prize because he is, after all, NATO's daddy. And I think also that it's becoming increasingly clear to everyone that the whole negotiation process was a deception. It was deceit. They were plotting behind the scenes to strike Iran from almost the beginning, perhaps before the beginning of the negotiations, but definitely after the US suddenly shifted its negotiating position. And we all recall how the night before this murderous assault and an attack, unprovoked and illegal, that Trump said he's against war and he's against an attack. But then the day after, he came out gloating and, as you rightly pointed out, basically took credit for everything. But gradually, as things began to change and as the tide began to turn, we saw Netanyahu become increasingly desperate. And that is why Trump entered the war. But even after the US attack, which according to Western intelligence agencies was a failure, even after that, Netanyahu's fortunes began to continue to go downhill. And he was literally begging the United States to stop the war. So the regime, alongside the United States, and with the support of the collective West, and the indifference of all these regimes in our region, every single one of them except for Yemen, either they collaborated or they did nothing and just made statements. Despite all that, Iran defeated this coalition. Iran defeated the Israeli regime. And we saw that before the secession of I can't call it a ceasefire because Iran has not accepted a ceasefire. Before the halt in military fire, we saw that during the last 2 hours, the Iranians were hammering the Israeli regime from north to south. And as Trump admitted, the regime took a major battering. And as Bannon, as you rightly pointed out earlier, said that this was all about saving the Israeli regime because they were in serious trouble. So round one clearly goes to the people of Iran whose only sin is to support the Palestinian people since the inception of the revolution. The Iranians have been the only country honestly supporting the Palestinian people alongside Yemen after the revolution 10 years ago. That is Iran's sin. That is why Iran has been accused of human rights violations, terrorism, producing a nuclear weapon. All of these accusations are simply made up in order to help the Israeli regime to marginalize Iran and to help the regime subjugate the Palestinian people.
Some things have become clear when the pretender to the throne, the peacock throne as it once was known, stolen throne actually from India, with the jewels stolen out of it by the English and now in the crown of King Charles, but that's another set of stories. But on the peacock throne was once the Pahlavi dynasty, who were themselves pretenders. The British plucked an army sergeant, I think, and made him the first Shah, sidelining the actual traditional Persian royal family. But again, that's another story. But Pahlavi has blocked Donald Trump on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm not making this up. That would seem to indicate that his ambitions of restoration are at least now put to bed. Do you think?
Well, if he ever thought that he would ever return to Iran and to have any role in even running an elementary school, he is completely mad. He is the corrupt son of a corrupt family that stole billions of dollars of Iranian assets when fleeing the country. And he has been supporting, he and the other terror groups that the United States backs and the other groups that the United States has funded over the last few decades, all of them have supported sanctions. All of them have supported terrorism. All of them have supported war against Iran. And they think that ordinary Iranians would ever support them? They're mad. Either they're mad or the money is so good that they're willing to say anything and do anything to receive the funding from the United States. They must have been wasting those billions of dollars over the past 45 years in gambling and in corruption. Otherwise, I don't know why anyone would need to behave in such a ridiculous manner.
Now, you don't have any state secrets, and even if you did, you wouldn't impart them over the airwaves. But what do you think has happened to the Iranian nuclear material, and will it now continue, the Iranian nuclear program?
Well, if we accept Western intelligence agencies and American intelligence agencies, what they say, and accept the fact, as they put it, that the Iranian nuclear program is largely intact and that it has only been slightly damaged and set back a few months, then that shows how competent Iranian engineers are and how sophisticated the Iranian leadership is, that it is so capable of defending its key assets across the board, and how the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite this blitzkrieg, was able to regroup so quickly and defeat this ethno-supremacist regime and its allies in Washington. That aside, though, I think that the bigger defeat for Trump and for the Israeli regime is that Iran subsequently said, based on the decision made by Parliament today, that we're not going to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency into Iran anytime soon, until we're fully satisfied with the security of our nuclear assets. And that could mean forever, because as long as Iran does not feel secure, as long as Iran believes that the United States or the Israeli regime may bomb its nuclear assets, then they won't allow these people in. And it's very interesting, George. The internet, when the Israeli regime carried out this blitzkrieg and murdered women and children and bombed Iranian national radio and television, and that's also another story. We saw women presenters, both on radio and television and for children's programs, stand their ground as they were being bombed. But you never see that in the Western media. They don't call these Iranian women heroes. It's only a particular type of woman that they call heroes. Those who are those who are obedient to their masters in the West. But the Iranians will not let them back into the country, the IAEA inspectors, until they feel satisfied about security. And that may never happen again, because when the West supports bombing Iran, when the Israeli regime was striking nuclear sites, which could have led to contamination, radioactive contamination, and a catastrophe, Western regimes were all saying Israel has the right to defend itself. Just like when it's carrying out the genocide in Gaza, the Holocaust in Gaza, they say Israel has the right to defend itself. When it's bombing apartment blocks in Beirut, they say Israel has the right to defend itself. So when Western regimes behave like that, when the International Atomic Energy Agency's chief refuses to condemn attacks on Iran's peaceful nuclear program, then why should Iran ever allow them in? So I think that this was a huge defeat for the United States. A, they no longer have access to the nuclear program. They no longer have information about the nuclear program. B, even those segments of Iranian society that were considered to be liberal and Western-oriented, and who believed a lot of the propaganda coming from the Western-owned Persian media, their worldview has changed. The Western narrative in Iran is broken. No one trusts the West anymore. People have seen how the West targets women and children, how CNN and Fox News are the same. When the CNN may hate Trump, but when they kill Iranians, when the Zionists kill Iranians, they're all the same. Breitbart and the New York Times, they're all the same. And this, I think, is a major catastrophe for US influence in Iran, because they've united the people, they've woken up a younger generation who did not see the revolution or the imposed war that the West imposed on Iran. And now that is going to make things much more difficult for the United States in the months ahead. And finally, if the Israeli regime does strike Iran again, it will get a battering worse than before, because the Israelis gave it their best shot. And we have to keep in mind, what the Israeli regime has is the best technology that the West has to offer, far better than anything that has ever been given to Ukraine. And now the Iranians are learning about their weaknesses and about their enemy's strengths. And the Iranians are swiftly going to prepare themselves for the next round. So hopefully, if the Israeli regime is stupid enough and foolish enough to attack Iran again, hopefully the next round will be the knockout blow for Iran, defeating the Israeli regime.
And yet, with your former hat of Professor of American Studies on, you must have been amazed at the result in New York yesterday with the election of a left-wing, a socialist, explicitly socialist, albeit of the American kind, Muslim, albeit of the American kind. But the Israel lobby threw absolutely everything at that young man of, I think, 33 years old. There's nothing they didn't say about him, his faith, his ideas. The billions were deployed by Bloomberg and others, and the entire imperialist media in the United States were all concentrating their fire on this young man who emerged victorious. What does that tell you?
I think it shows that the United States is changing and that the people are waking up, even though in the second round, I'm pretty sure that these Democrats will join the Republicans to stop him. But whether he becomes mayor or not, this is a major defeat for the Zionists and for the neocons and the establishment. Young people across the United States are waking up. George, you cannot hide a genocide forever. People will wake up. They'll see what's happening. They see the reality on the ground. For 21 months, they've been carrying out a genocide. And then they try to distract people's attention away by demonizing Iran. We saw all the Western media suddenly attack Iran. And despite the fact that Iran has been demonized for 4.5 decades, people didn't take the bait. People didn't believe it. People continue to support Iran and oppose US aggression. They no longer believe the nonsense that the West has been putting out against Iran, or these Arab oil and gas rich dictators who've been using their media to promote sectarianism and racism and religious hatred. People are no longer believing this. It's changing. It will take time. And I don't know if he will be the mayor, and if he does become the mayor, if he will remain true to what are his principles today. But it is a sign of change. We see young Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, the young lady at MIT who made that fantastic speech in defense of the Palestinian people, they're bringing about change. And that's why, as I've said before, even though we're living in very, very dark times and very, very dangerous times, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And these young people, guided by those who are older and who understand the history of empire, hopefully they'll bring about a situation ultimately where we can live more comfortably with one another and protected by the rule of law, rather than the empire lashing out at whoever it wants, whenever it wants.
Will we hear from the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, tomorrow? We haven't heard from him yet.
I don't know if we're going to hear from him tomorrow, but he is so popular now. People across the country are so thankful for his leadership and the way in which from the very beginning he stood his ground and told the people that we are going to win this war. And people across the world are now turning to him. People from across the region, despite the attempts of for decades, to create sectarian and racist and religious hatred, people are looking to him as the person who defeated the empire, who defeated Zionism, and who continues to support the Palestinian people. And hopefully he and others will continue this resistance until ultimately the Israeli regime has been defeated, like the apartheid regime in South Africa. The only way for peace in this region ultimately is for the end of supremacism, is for the dismantling of ethno-supremacism, and for equality among all people in Palestine. And the fact is that these foolish and bloodthirsty Zionists, if they were sane, they would recognize that this would be to their benefit.
Iran's nuclear program. Instead, he may have accidentally. Right. So Benjamin Netanyahu promised to nobble Iran's nuclear program. Instead, he may have accidentally handed them the perfect excuse to double down. So smoke has now cleared over those 3 nuclear sites of Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. Iran isn't licking its wounds, it's tightening its lab coats again, recalibrating centrifuges and preparing to restart its research from the stockpiles of enriched uranium they very much still have, as if nothing at all has happened. What Netanyahu and Trump triumphantly branded as historic victory is fast revealing itself to be a complete and utter failure, and historic failure. The so-called obliteration of Iran's nuclear capacity has turned out to be little more than a public relations stunt, with Iran's program still intact, its facilities apparently operational, and its scientists calmly going back to work. If this was meant to be Israel's knockout punch, then Iran just got up, dusted itself off, and is very much ready for round 2 if needs be, smirking all the while as their nuclear program prepares to restart imminently. Netanyahu failed. The whole world knows he failed, and Israel has been left looking every bit as weak as it truly is. Absolutely nothing without US protection. More isolated than it was before as more people turn against the Zionist colonial project, and it hasn't come soon enough. Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to make history, and you can argue he's done that, though not in the way he'll want to be remembered, of course. The guy who started a fight with Iran and got his backside handed to him on a plate, even with US support. Not only will he be remembered for the genocide of Gaza, but he's now going to become a cautionary tale too. The dust is now settling on one of the most ill-conceived military gambits in recent history, committed because more war is all Netanyahu can do to stay in power now, it seems. Israel's unprovoked attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, touted by Netanyahu and Donald Trump as a decisive strike to eliminate Iran's nuclear ambitions, the operation has spectacularly failed. The reality, as confirmed by leaked US intelligence and public statements by Iran, is that Israel achieved none of their strategic aims, neither ending Iran's nuclear ambitions nor delivering regime change. Iran's nuclear program is not only intact, it's already ramping up again. Netanyahu declared a historic victory. But within days, Iranian officials were already back at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan inspecting and reassessing and restarting enrichment protocols. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, the AEOI, have confirmed what the world had already been suspecting, that the nuclear program very much could and would continue pretty much uninterrupted. Iran didn't just survive the attacks, it was already prepared for them. Long before the first Israeli drone took off for those 3 sites, Iran had contingency plans already put in place, already underway. Sensitive equipment had been relocated, critical materials had been moved, and safety protocols activated. The result was no radiation leaks, no catastrophic damage, no strategic loss. According to leaked US intelligence obtained after the strike, Iran's nuclear infrastructure remains largely intact, with only minor delays estimated, a couple of months at most. Rather than crippling Iran, the attacks have galvanized its leadership and scientific community instead. Iran has openly declared its intention to continue and expand its nuclear program. The AEOI has stated that the country's nuclear development is too deeply entrenched in its scientific and technological infrastructure to be dismantled by external aggression. Iran has emphasized that this program is part of its sovereign rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, a treaty it continues to honor, unlike Israel, who have always refused to sign it. In a scathing rebuke, Iranian officials accused the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, of complicity with Israel, suggesting the agency failed to protect Iran's rights as a signatory of the NPT. There's a good argument for that. Tehran insists the IAEA turned a blind eye as Israel and the US targeted civilian nuclear infrastructure in violation of international norms. Even IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi has warned that these attacks could risk the collapse of the NPT itself, but it's happened on your watch, sunshine, hasn't it? Iran's accusations strike at the heart of the global nuclear order. If a nation complying with the NPT can be attacked with impunity, then the entire system loses credibility, and somebody has to answer to that. The precedent set by Israel and the US could drive other nations to withdraw from the treaty altogether, viewing compliance with it as a vulnerability or just plain pointless, rather than a path to maintaining peace and keeping control over nuclear threats in this world. Trump boasted that the joint US-Israeli strikes had obliterated Iran's nuclear sites, but no satellite imagery at all supports his claims. No radiation leaks occurred. And most damning of all, those US intelligence reports have contradicted him outright. The damage, officials admit, is superficial. Some above-ground infrastructure was hit, but centrifuges and enrichment stockpiles had already been moved. Even Vice President J.D. Vance, not usually the quickest mind in the room, let's say, has acknowledged the operation did not achieve its aims. In remarks to the Senate Intelligence Committee, Vance noted that we have not degraded Iran's nuclear capacity in any significant way. If this was a strategic victory, it is one only in rhetoric. He'd also said as much to Fox News. J.D. Vance admits Iran's uranium most likely survived US strikes. It's still there. US Vice President J.D. Vance has conceded that Iran's stockpile of near weapons-grade uranium may remain intact despite a wave of US airstrikes targeting key nuclear sites. The Guardian reports. In an interview with Fox News, Vance dismissed concerns about the uranium's location, instead questioning Iran's ability to weaponize the material. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has not been granted access to Iranian facilities since the war began, and its chief, Rafael Grossi, confirms the possibility that the stockpile, estimated at 400 kilograms and previously housed in Isfahan, was moved prior to the strikes. The revelation has sparked fresh doubts about the efficacy of the US campaign. Even Vance is questioning Iran's ability to weaponize the material, but that was what the strikes were all about, wasn't it? It's the elephant in the room. You just said the quiet bit out loud. Wouldn't be the first time, would it? Iran's skepticism of the recent ceasefire is well-founded. Israeli forces reportedly launched 3 more attacks after the truce was announced. Iran has called these violations a transparent attempt to sabotage the peace process that was only just starting to get underway. Many Iranian officials refused to call it a ceasefire at all, opting instead for a temporary pause, fully expecting Israel to strike again in the not-too-distant future. And this mistrust is not paranoia. It's history, isn't it? Israel's long record of ceasefire violations in Gaza and Lebanon most recently makes Iranian doubts entirely rational. Iranian military commanders have issued clear warnings to both Israel and the US that any further aggression will be met with force. The deterrent strategy now includes not only missiles, but cyber countermeasures as well, and also regional alliances. One of the most significant outcomes of this conflict is the collapse of a long-standing myth that Israel is militarily untouchable. Operation True Promise 3, Iran's code name for this latest batch of strikes, the True Promise series, if you like, proved devastatingly effective. Iranian missiles penetrated Israeli air defenses, struck military bases, and exposed deep vulnerabilities. The world saw a different Israel. Not the invincible force, anything but an Operation Lion's Courage, but a state deeply dependent on US protection. The symbolism of this shift cannot be overstated, because for decades, Israel has used its perceived invulnerability as both a deterrent and a diplomatic weapon, and now that aura is gone. And with it, Netanyahu's carefully curated image as the protector of the Jewish state will have taken another critical blow as well, getting more and more fed up and bored, frankly, with having to deal with matters in the Middle East. In addition to military setbacks, Israel's cyber warfare efforts against Iran flopped as well. Despite weeks of coordinated digital attacks that have been happening in the run-up to these latest strikes, Iran's financial sector remained operational. Iran's central bank confirmed that Israel failed to disrupt their banking systems despite attempts to do so. In an age where cyber warfare is often so much more damaging than missiles can be, Israel's failure to dent Iran's economic infrastructure in this way, that Iran's cyber security was more than a match for it, is another layer of strategic humiliation. Israel dedicated entire units of the IDF to cyber warfare, and they failed. Which is particularly embarrassing given Israel's reputation for cyber prowess. That Iran weathered both kinetic and digital assaults with minimal disruption speaks volumes about the robustness of its infrastructure, and the overestimation of Israel's own capabilities found woefully wanting. As Iran restarts its nuclear activities, Western media outlets have predictably shifted their narratives. Reports are now surfacing about Iran cracking down on alleged Mossad spies, with some accusing Tehran of using the war as an excuse for repression now by continuing to rout Mossad out from their nation, which is just the most bizarre and desperate attack line to take to try and save Israel some face. What weak-willed editor thought this was a good angle? It came from France 24, disappointingly. But given the scale of Israeli espionage efforts in the region, Iran's actions appear less like repression and more like national security cleanup, long overdue. Indeed, countries under attack often tighten internal security. To frame this as exceptional, though, or unjust, is ridiculous. And it's hypocritical, especially when the US and its allies have all engaged in similar measures under far less threatening circumstances. Iran's domestic actions should be scrutinized, but not in isolation from the external threats that it faced. The real measure of victory in a conflict of this scale, though, is strategic endurance. Israel and the US sought to dismantle Iran's nuclear program and weaken its regime. They failed on both counts. Iran's regime remains intact. Its nuclear facilities are operational, all but. Its scientists are at work again. And its public, far from being demoralized, are being galvanized and unified by the attack, not divided. Every step Iran takes towards renewed uranium enrichment is a reminder of Netanyahu's failure. Every centrifuge that spins is an indictment of his decision to provoke a sovereign nation with a premeditated act of war. Every IAEA visit that verifies enrichment activity is a data point disproving Israel's claims of success. This operation has implications far beyond the Middle East. It sends a chilling message to countries that have trusted international treaties to protect their sovereign rights when they don't get applied to Israel, when Israel has made an exception of, and therefore those protections, those treaties are completely undermined. That's got to end. It encourages nuclear proliferation by showing that compliance invites attack while deterrence may prevent it. The assault also sets a dangerous precedent for future American administrations. By participating in what amounts to a preventive war, the US has further eroded its moral authority and emboldened its adversaries. The backlash may not be immediate, but it's sure to come. Trump has been significantly weakened by this in the eyes of the American public and his MAGA base, perhaps in the form of accelerated nuclear development elsewhere, since those treaties have been undermined, though I would hope not, or the quiet defection of countries from the NPT. Benjamin Netanyahu may have declared victory, but history is going to judge him very differently, as a failure and as a maniac. His unprovoked assault on Iran has achieved none of its aims. Iran's nuclear program survives, its sovereignty has been asserted, and its enemies exposed as aggressors. Netanyahu has failed on every single measure. The myth of Israeli invincibility has been shattered as a result of his own stupidity. The strategic balance of the region has therefore shifted, and for what? To protect him in his position of power, because that's all it's ever been about. For Netanyahu, the consequences are political as well as strategic. Already embattled at home, embattled in the courts, he now faces the fallout of an operation that not only failed, but absolutely humiliated him and his government, even if he won't admit it. When war is all he's really got now, and he can't even win at that here. The legacy he leaves behind now will be a deserved one, not being one of strength and deterrence, but of overreach, of greed, of self-servitude, of miscalculation, and of catastrophic failure. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about his abject failure and what led to it, please do check out this video recommendation here.
And Trump says that strikes on Iran were devastating and they're done. Israel has agreed to this assessment, whether it is or isn't destroyed. What we hope this means is that the U.S. is done there. No do-overs, no backsies. This is the first time in my life that I do not want to question a government narrative. I want this to be done. I don't want to go back at all. Here's the president confirming this just today.
A statement came in from the Atomic Energy Commission of Israel. And I just wondered, this is an official letter, and they're very serious people, as you know. The devastating U.S. strike on Fordo destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility totally inoperable. It was devastated. We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come. This achievement can continue indefinitely if Iran does not get access to nuclear material, which it won't. It's so sad that that whole thing had to go.
All right. Well, the administration is having to defend the destruction after the Washington Post reported that these sites were not destroyed and that leaked intelligence reports said as much. And the president is saying those reports were incomplete. They were premature. It wasn't ready for submission. It was a rough draft, so to speak. And you know what? I'm willing to participate in this because as an anti-war channel, we absolutely do not think that the United States needs to do another go-round. Like I said before, no do-overs, no backsies. Well, retired Colonel Douglas McGregor is going to join us so he can tell us what he actually thinks of this intelligence. So, Colonel, thank you for joining us. Given that no one was killed in the initial strike or the retaliation, do you think we should leave it there? Can
Wink,
you see me
wink.
winking at you right now?
Listening to audio, we're winking. We're
Right.
just going to go along with this deception.
What do you think?
Well, let me tell you, I'm afraid to challenge Natalie. She's pretty ferocious about it. So
Smart move, Colonel.
yeah, I was going to say you would know more about it than I do. Now, listen, more and more interesting things are coming out. You pointed to the Washington Post. There's also additional information from various sources that President Putin appears to have played a role in persuading the Iranians to go along with this. Beyond that, I don't know too much. But the bottom line is whatever we hit was not significant, and we didn't seem to have made much difference to that entire program. The real question at this stage is, what about this ceasefire? What's its purpose? What's the basis for it? Is there some plan to go forward and craft some sort of compromise? I mean, what's the expectation? Because we also know that Israel is running out of cash and missiles. Their economy is about to implode, and they've run out of missiles. By the way, we're having problems with our own missile inventories in the Navy. We shot large numbers of missiles in support of Israel's defense. Those destroyers have to go back to port and reload. And then Raytheon reported earlier today that they have a problem with rocket motors, that while we build some components, we're dependent on foreign sources for the critical components in our rocket motors. We produce, if it's a good day, 660 missiles a year. This is the Patriot THAAD missile complex. That's going to be gone in a few days, frankly, in any modern war. So I don't know what's going on. It looks to me like there are a lot of considerations here. What does it really mean? I don't know. But I think President Trump took a long walk out on a very slender limb when he told everybody that the war was over, that he is the master of the universe and he solved this problem and brought peace. Good luck with that. I hope so, but like Natalie, but I don't think so.
Well, I mean, if the deception is there was never a nuclear program to begin with, but then we're led to believe that it was just destroyed. So we know it wasn't there, but it was just destroyed. Is Israel going to go along with this quote unquote deception? I mean, after all, they wanted regime change. So is Israel just going to sort of sit back and say, oh, good, hey, great. I'm glad this part of our chapter in our history is done now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up regime change, because I think that's the least likely outcome at this point. There's a lot of evidence to suggest the country is pulled together more now than ever in its more recent 30, 40, 50-year history. Of course, there was an expectation because you have Azeri Turks and Arabs and Balukis and Kurds, different ethnic groups living within the country, that they could be stirred up to revolt against the central authority in Tehran. That hasn't worked very well. Don't see much evidence that will happen. Haven't seen any American or Israeli flags on the streets of Tehran and people gathering by the hundreds of thousands demanding regime change. I think it's very clear that Israel needs a break. I'm sure that the Iranians will welcome this, and they're going to get more technical expertise, support from Russia than they've ever gotten before, along with more support and supplies from China. But I think the Israelis in particular right now need help and support to deal with the economy. And frankly, they've run very, very low on missiles. So I don't know what happens in the future. I don't know if this lasts 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, but I don't think it's over, because fundamentally, the cause of everything is Gaza. And Gaza continues. And I'm sure you've seen this new report that was published in the Cradle that's Harvard linked, and it talks about 400,000 dead in Gaza. How many of those women and children is anybody's guess. But as long as this continues, nothing will end, because virtually everyone in the region has concluded that they can't coexist with Israel, because Israel refuses to coexist with them.
Yeah, the number
current leadership of Israel, let's be clear that there are plenty of Israelis that do want to coexist in the Middle East.
Really?
They just don't have any power.
Really? You
Well,
think
I don't
so?
know if plenty. I don't think I can quantify that. We do see peace movements inside of Israel, but we don't know. We know that the Netanyahu government was on the verge of ending before the war began. So, what is your assessment that Israelis do want to continue this war?
I think Mr. Netanyahu's policies have a lot of support. And I don't know if that's 70 or 80%. I know that there are Israelis who are no less horrified by all of this than you and I are, but they're a pretty small minority. I think the vast majority still support the policies, but I think overwhelmingly nobody likes the man. That I think you can bet on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have support for what he's trying to do. Hate is a very powerful weapon. There's a lot of hatred in Israel for the people that live around it, and particularly the Arabs that live in it. And I think that's the biggest issue. And I just don't see how you get anywhere in the region until you deal with that. You've got to put an end to this mass murder and expulsion in Gaza.
I know people who've actually worked for Netanyahu, and they specifically have called him corrupt, that he's an absolutely corrupt politician, but they absolutely support this position. So they can, on the one hand, I guess, like, look past the corruption and support this destruction in Gaza. Colonel, the NATO summit happening right now. President Trump gets off the plane, puts on a USA hat, is having meetings with people coming to him. What is your assessment of the future of NATO and the U.S. policy towards NATO, like funneling money in that direction, getting these countries to come to the table? But there's a lot of talk about, hey, at this NATO summit, that Russia is about to attack Europe.
Well, the good news is that Russia is absolutely not about to attack Europe. It has no interest in doing that. I think Trump is right when he says, in talking to President Putin, that it's very clear that President Putin wants to end this war. Of course, President Putin wanted to end this whole thing 3 weeks into February. That's why they met with the Ukrainians in April of 2022 and crafted a compromise, a solution that would have been wonderful for Ukraine and ended this tragedy. Unfortunately, that failed miserably. We all know why. The last administration, with its friends in NATO, did everything they could to stop it. I don't think there is a future for NATO, to be perfectly frank. I think NATO is on its last legs. As far as this 5% increase, I wouldn't hold my breath. The Spaniards, the Slovaks, and others have said, are you kidding? We're not spending that kind of money. Who's driving this? Primarily France, Great Britain, and Germany. But there are other issues here. The Germans and the Italians have both come to us and said, by the way, we'd like to have our $145 billion worth of gold that you supposedly have in your vaults under New York City. Can we have that back? And thus far, the response is a deafening silence. I think there's a lot more going on under the surface. And I can tell you that President Trump arriving with his hat that says USA on it is cute, but not particularly impressive in Europe.
You know that most coffee out there is weak, it's acidic, it doesn't taste good, it's mass produced by corporations, it sits on shelves for so long that...
President said that about Iran and Israel yesterday. They don't know what the F they're doing because he knows that it's so volatile. And then on aboard Air Force One, he said, look, Iran can have a beautiful future. We want the best for them. And he started saying effusive things for Iran, which was not what he had said in his speech at Riyadh. He was very threatening in that manner. So it's hard for us to follow the diplomacy or the diplomacy theater. And, why is he behaving like this? Has he somehow signaled to Israel, we're no longer bullying them on your behalf? Or do you think that we're just reading the tea leaves and that's a fool's errand?
I think we just have to stand back and wait and see, because frankly, he's being kind of incoherent. I mean, that's why I asked the question about what's the strategy. I'm always looking for the purpose that lies behind what people do. I haven't really figured it out. Now, one thing I can say with absolute certainty, and I like President Trump because of this, I know he doesn't want a war. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The question is he in a position to avoid it? Is he not necessarily so put upon by his, donors and the Congress, all of whom are collectively committed to the destruction of Iran and the establishment of a new order in the Middle East dominated by Israel? I don't know. And then again, you got to go back to this plan to dismember and destroy Iran. Sounds an awful lot like the plan to dismember and destroy Russia. You know, Zelensky was the battering ram with his endless numbers of Ukrainians to be sacrificed on the battlefield to destroy Russia. We were going to expel Russia from the world. We were going to dethrone Putin and then ultimately put in a new government. We were going to strip Russia of her resources, divide her into piece parts, and pass it out. She would become a vassal state in the developing world. What do you hear now about behind the scenes about Iran? Essentially the same thing. We want the oil resources, the natural gas. We were going to break it up. You just pull up the Iran map and look at where all these various minorities are located or ethnic groups. Same kind of mentality. And then we're going to put somebody in that's going to be a good puppet and do what we in Israel tell them to do. That has failed. I think President Trump understands that. But does that mean the plan is dead? Does that mean the war is over? There will be no more fighting? No, I don't think so. And I don't know what would start it. I don't think the Iranians, per se, will be the first to fire another shot. If there's more fighting to be done, I think the Israelis will decide that. But I don't see any evidence that we're not going to support them and that we're not going to stand by them. I think we absolutely will. So I'm not sure what President Trump means this time. But, you know, it's pretty tough to turn to people and say, look, we're really your friends. This is a friendly bombing exercise. Don't understand that we're here with love and kisses. I don't think so.
Yeah, it does feel like theater. I think that is the perfect assessment. It's like we have to sit back because there's a bit of schizophrenia happening right now, and trying to map all of this out is very, very difficult. Who knows from 1 minute to the next, with a Truth Social post to a bombing campaign next, and then we're back to being friends again, and we want to make Iran great again. MIGA.
We'll all follow Natalie. We'll all follow Natalie's lead here and hope for the best.
Yeah, that's always wise. I think it's a wise lesson. Go ahead, Philip.
Can I ask a quick question? But something about I hate to get in Natalie's way on this, but like the ruse doesn't make any sense, because if they're saying that Iran's nuclear material is now gone, they no longer have it. But if we know they have it and we're pretending like they don't, can they just go on enriching uranium without any IAEA oversight? Can they just do what they want now? Because what are we going to do? Say, well, Iran is now working towards nuclear weapons with what? If it's destroyed, what do they have?
Right.
First of all, I'm not sure we know. And if we do know, we're not telling anybody. Secondly, what's the big lesson that you learn if you're sitting in Tehran from all of this, or Riyadh, or Karachi, or Islamabad, or Cairo, or anywhere else? If you don't have a nuclear weapon, then the United States and its friends in Israel can come for you at any point in time they like. The lesson is you better get a nuclear weapon. That's the bad news. Now, the good news is the Iranians have said they will not leave the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's a very good thing. The problem is that treaty has no impact whatsoever on Israel, and Israel's not giving up anything. And we seem to want to make sure that Israel has a permanent monopoly on the nuclear weapon so that they can bomb, intimidate, threaten their neighbors at will, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be surprised at anything that happens from this point forward. But I think the notion that somehow or another everybody says, okay, that's fine, it's over now, we promise we won't do anything. I think we're going to see more nuclear weapons in more countries, unfortunately. That's the principal outcome.
Right. It's a chain reaction, but we have to remember that the first one in the region was Israel. But Philip makes a good point, because now why would the IAEA even ever go to Iran, even though Iran has been working alongside the IAEA? We had Rafael Grossi say, we've inspected every gram. We know what they're up to. Even last year saying we found some at 60%. That wasn't so good. And Iran said, oops, but at least we had some kind of record. But now why would they even go there? Like, oh, the U.S. blew it up. See you never. That doesn't make sense either, right?
Well, the bad news is we've also discovered that Grossi and the IAEA were reporting pretty faithfully to the Israelis.
Yeah.
No,
right. That was missed just before the Israelis starting their bombing campaign. In fact, that may even be why the Israelis started their bombing campaign, is because Iran leaked these documents. This was front page news in the East and a blip in the West.
Yes. Well, that's your mainstream media. We've been down that road before. We understand. I think we just have to keep in mind that whether we like it or not, Israel and the lobby have an enormous amount of influence and control over the White House and the Hill. So how can we be certain of anything, regardless of what the president says? And by the way, I'm the first to stand up and say, I think President Trump's intentions are good. Unfortunately, intentions don't count for much in the environment where he's operating. You have to be a ruthless SOB in order to make your impact. And I've never seen him behave that way. I think he's too nice, to be frank.
Colonel Douglas McGregor, thank you so much for your assessment as always. We appreciate it. Thanks, Colonel.
Hey, thanks. Bye-bye.
Six months in, Steve, and here we are, turning back on the campaign promises, and we bombed Iran on behalf of Israel. Yes, it was on behalf of Israel. We're entering a nuclear war, World War III, because the entire world is going to erupt. And you want to know the people that are cheering it on right now? Their tune is going to drastically change the minute we start seeing flag-draped coffins on the nightly news, on Fox News that brainwashes all the baby boomers, and on CNN that brainwashes all the Democrat baby boomers. And that is exactly how this is going to go down.
So there's this guy, Mark Levin, who's foaming at the mouth for war with Iran, and here's what he said. This is interesting because
times the military has to be used. If it's used by a smart commander in chief, if it's used wisely, if it's used for a specific purpose, it gives us peace. So I want the so-called, I don't know what to call them, people running around warmonger, the sloganeers. There should be an education for you too. There should be an education for you too. America, don't you feel relief? Of course you feel relief. Because these Islamo-Nazis were building nuclear weapons to attack us too, with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Guess what? You can go to bed peacefully tonight. No, that's not going to happen.
That's the exact thing that Saddam Hussein is trying to get weapons of mass destruction so he can attack us. Why in the F would a country like Iran or Iraq or any want to attack the biggest military in the world? Again, so that's Mark Levin, and he's telling you you're supposed to feel, boy, didn't you rest easy? Didn't you sleep better last night because Trump started a war with Iran? No. In fact, I was worried about a retaliatory strike inside the United States, like most people were.
Which wise leader is he talking about that used force? I can't remember us ever winning a war as long as I've been alive.
Because we haven't. Well, you don't remember Grenada? It was fantastic.
Aside from the triumph of Grenada.
So here is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She tweeted this out. She says, MAGA is not for foreign wars. We are not for regime change. We are for America first. The United States should not be involved in fighting nuclear-armed Israel's war with Iran. And here, watch, she goes off. This is kind of good.
I know. Don't watch the show. But no, I didn't sleep better after neocons and warmongers talked this administration into entering a hot war that Israel started after Netanyahu barely won a vote, Steve, barely won a vote by 2 votes in order to stay in power the day before Israel attacked, an unprovoked attack, Iran. Now, I'm not making apologies for Iran. I have no.
So I didn't, by the way, that's a little news for me. I didn't know that they had some kind of a vote inside of Israel to see if Benjamin Netanyahu could remain in power, and he won by 2 votes. And then the next day he does the war with Iran. Did you know that, Kurt? I didn't know that.
So if there's not World War III, it means they're, like I said at the outset, they're going to pin the whole thing on Bibi Netanyahu and act like Israel's doesn't even.
Right.
I already hear that. I already hear that from people.
Yeah.
Like, I hate him.
Yeah.
Die-hard Zionists are saying that to me.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go.
Investment in the terrorist regime of Iran. But the reality is no American slept better after America bombed Iran, because all of a sudden we now have threats on our homeland
Right.
We now have warnings from our State Department for Americans overseas. Qatar put out a warning to Americans to shelter in place. Americans in Israel are terrified for their lives, as well as Israeli people are terrified for their lives because bombs have been falling in Israel. And and Americans all over the world are seriously questioning, is this going to be World War III? So no, I didn't sleep better, regardless of Mark Levin's silly name calling. And I don't think any American is sleeping better after this, Steve.
What's going to happen? You're coming back. Everybody's coming back. They're going to be here tomorrow. You guys are going to get briefings. What's going to happen? Are other voices going to get in to start advising the president, ma'am?
Well, I got to add on one more thing, Steve, and I'm sure you've covered it on your show. Mark Levin was one of the biggest never Trumpers when President Trump was running for president. So it absolutely makes me sick. It makes me want to throw up in my mouth that he's one of the voices that is constantly texting and calling President Trump's phone and showing up at the White House demanding for America to go to every single foreign war on behalf of Israel. I'm really sick and disgusted at that. And it's people like him and Lindsey Graham and all these other people that never really supported Trump in the beginning. People like me, regular people like me, donated to President Trump. We showed up at his rallies. We voted for him. We truly supported him. I've supported him the entire time. Mark Levin was a never Trumper. Compared President Trump, claimed that he was the same as Code Pink. All of this horrible attacks on President Trump. And he only supports him now because he couldn't beat him because people like me supported President Trump and got him elected. And Steve, I've spent 5 years. I've spent millions of dollars, millions of my own money, traveling this entire country campaigning for President Trump, defending him when everyone abandoned him after January 6th. And I would say I represent MAGA far more than Mark Levin or any of these other neocon suck-ups ever will and ever do, because MAGA is not for foreign wars. We are not for regime change, and we are for America first. That's not isolationism at all. That's for fixing our $37 trillion debt. That's fighting for border security. That's fighting for my kids, Steve. My kids are 22, 25, and 27, and I want them to have a future. And I am sick and tired of people like this. A lot of these people are going to be dead in 10 to 15 years, but my kids' future matters to me. And right now, their generation can't buy a house. They can't afford insurance. They can't get good paying jobs. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford to buy a car. They can't afford gas. They don't know if they're ever going to be able to save money for their retirement because they're barely making it paycheck to paycheck. And I am so angry about this. So all of them have crossed my line. And you want to know what I have that Mark Levin doesn't have? I have a voting card, Steve. I have a voting card because I have a district that believes in the greatness of America, that believes in America First policies, and desperately wants President Trump, his administration, and the Republican-controlled House and Senate to enact and support this. And I tell you what, 6 months in, Steve, and here we are, turning back on the campaign promises, and we bombed Iran on behalf of Israel. Yes, it was on behalf of Israel. We're entering a nuclear war, the World War III, because the entire world is going to erupt. And you want to know the people that are cheering it on right now? Their tune is going to drastically change the minute we start seeing flag-draped coffins on the nightly news, on Fox News that brainwashes all the baby boomers, and on CNN that brainwashes all the Democrat baby boomers. And that is exactly how this is going to go down.
So she's coming out hard, guns blazing against Trump for 6 months in, going back on his campaign promises, doing the exact opposite. And she's coming out guns blazing for Fox News. Look at that. Marjorie Taylor Greene turns out to be the sage, the person with the actual courage. Isn't that something? Because you were told the exact opposite about her, weren't you? Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm having a hard time hearing what she's saying because I am in love with that chair she's sitting in.
Really?
Yes. And the whole time I'm like, I got to look for a chair like that. I love that chair.
I do too.
Don't you not love that chair?
Jimmy, I'm loving it.
So here, she has a little bit more to say. So she goes, so I don't know, even though what she's basically saying there, what I hear is that she's more MAGA than Trump. She doesn't want to say it explicitly, but she just did kind of say it when she said 6 months in, we're already going back on our biggest campaign promises. So that's so she's going against Trump. She's going against Fox News. That's what we thought the squad was going to do in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, Ryan Grimm wrote a book. He puts it in his background when he does breaking points.
He's adorable. Here you go. She has more to say.
And the AI portion, I want to address that. See, that's a bunch of crap. They should have never put that poison pill in the House version of.
She's talking about in the big beautiful bill. She said there's a poison pill in there. It's the AI stuff, saying that states can't pass any laws to regulate AI for 10 years. Why would you put that in that bill? That's what she's talking about right now. Hang on, Kurt. What?
Screwed. You're screwed now, even if they don't go to war. You're still screwed because of that poison pill in the bill.
That's right.
About AI.
Yep. Okay, here we go.
One big beautiful bill in the first place. I am a 100% no vote if it is still there because I get to vote again. I get to vote.
And so there she is telling Trump, I'm voting against your big beautiful bill. So she's calling him out over the Iran war. She's then for going to war on behest of Israel. She's calling him out over the poison pill inside the big beautiful bill, saying she's not voting for Trump's big beautiful bill, and she's calling out Fox News. She's got this is good. This is good stuff.
And again, when it comes back to the House, and I am not voting for a 10-year moratorium on state rights to make regulations and laws on AI. That is absurd. And the one big beautiful bill is about taxes, energy, and border security. And that's exactly what it should be. So shame on the people that put it out there. That should be separate legislation. And I'm not playing ball anymore. This weekend, I turned a corner.
So she says, shame on the people who put the big beautiful bill out there. You know who did that? Donald Trump. So she's saying, shame on Donald Trump.
To you. You're not supposed to be loyal to him. I think everyone's done enough being loyal to him.
That is such a good point. That Donald Trump is supposed to be loyal to you.
Morons.
You're not supposed to be loyal to Donald Trump. He's supposed to be loyal to you.
Don't even ask me if I'm loyal to Trump. I never was loyal to Trump. I thought that asshole was going to do what I wanted. Thank God I didn't vote. I said if Trump does even any of the things, I'll know voting counts. Well, now we know it doesn't count.
I think she has a little bit more.
I'm not playing ball anymore. I'm going to vote exactly for what I campaigned on, exactly for what I promised my district, and I will use my voting card to make that happen.
MTG, what's your social media? People will go.
Okay, so she's gonna vote against Donald Trump, and here I'll just read. She had a tweet that kind of said the same thing, but here it's worth reading. She said, "I spent millions of my own money and traveled the entire country campaigning for President Trump and his MAGA agenda and his promises. And Trump's MAGA agenda included these key promises: no foreign wars, no regime change, and world peace. And this is what the people voted for. Only 6 months in, and we're back to foreign wars, regime change, and World War III. It feels like a complete bait and switch to please the neocons, warmongers, military-industrial complex contracts, and neocon TV personalities that MAGA hates and who were never Trumpers. After the bombs were dropped, we were told complete success, and Iran's nuclear capabilities were totally wiped out. Then it quickly turned to Iran's nuclear facilities partially damaged, and now it's we don't know where their enriched uranium is."
Wow. Good thing it doesn't matter if they have nukes. Good thing that was never an issue.
It does. Let me be very clear. My children are 22, 25, and 27, and she looks fantastic for having this.
She sure does.
I will literally fight anyone for their future. And their future, that means Trump. That's how you spell Trump. And their future and their entire generation's future must be free of America last foreign wars that provoke terrorist attacks on our homeland, military drafts, and nuclear war. I am fighting for them to have a future where they can afford to buy a home, afford insurance, invest for retirement, enjoy life, retain their God-given freedoms, afford to raise a family under their Christian faith, not be in debt, safety and security, and not have our own taxpayer-funded government destroy it all. Contrary to brainwashed Democrat boomers think and protest about, Trump is not a king, MAGA is not a cult, and I can and do have my own opinion. So that's the perfect example of that. She's not in a cult. So that's what I've been telling people, that the cult, the real cult that I experienced is when I went to the Democratic National Convention last summer. That's a cult. No criticisms allowed. And here the MAGA people who come to my shows, they're not in a cult either. They're all openly criticizing Israel, Trump's subservience to Israel, and all this stuff.
Yeah. You know, when you leave a cult, by the way, I can tell you this from experience, because you couldn't have talked me out of leaving the thing I was in when I was a kid. The way you leave it is when it doesn't do the thing it said it was going to do for you. That's when you leave. And guess what? Whoever, I call them kaboomers, not boomers, the kaboomers in charge, you're not delivering enough to trick people anymore. So you can get bots and you can put the CIA on social media and put them in charge of all the stuff, but people know if stuff's not working out. We've already seen this in the Soviet Union, remember?
Yeah.
Remember how the central power collapsed because they didn't deliver at the end of the day? So what do you think is going to happen? Not the same thing? The Soviets didn't even have the spying apparatus we have, by the way.
Correct. Hey, if you watch this show,
bloodthirsty terrorist had justified his illegal. I'm going to discuss two major setbacks to Israel and its war criminal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in this video. Remember, this bloodthirsty terrorist had justified his illegal attack on a sovereign country by basing it on the excuse that Iran was about to produce nuclear bombs and Israeli terrorists needed to destroy Tehran's capabilities by bombing Iranian nuclear sites? Guess what? Not only are Iranian nuclear facilities unscathed and intact, but the Iranians are more determined to acquire nuclear weapons, more than ever. You only have to see the dramatic developments of the past few days in Iran. And then there is this new declaration by Donald Trump that Iran had inflicted unbearable pain on Israel by firing a barrage of ballistic missiles. Even Donald Trump thinks Iran is the winner here. The Iranian parliament has just voted unanimously, yes, unanimously, to cut ties with the compromised International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA. This just happened in the last few hours in the Iranian parliament. In the 223-seat Iranian parliament, 221 members voted in favor of cutting ties with the IAEA, and there was not a single vote against the proposal. That's how united the Iranian parliament is following the indiscriminate bombing by Israeli terrorists. As I said in my earlier videos, Israelis and the Donald Trump administration have single-handedly united Iranians against them, even though the likes of the Western propaganda outlets such as the BBC would tell you, quoting anonymous and mysterious sources, that there is a huge unrest against the current establishment in Iran. And just to let you know, these people who are reporting about this so-called unrest in Iran are themselves based out of London. That's the level of deception these fake news peddlers are prepared to go through, and it's time you understood their nefarious motive. Cutting ties with the IAEA is massive. What this means is that the IAEA wouldn't be able to inspect Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran will also immediately refuse to cooperate with the installation of cameras at its nuclear facilities, inspections, inspector access, or submitting reports to the agency. There's also been a suspicion in the Iranian establishment that the IAEA had used the information on the Iranian scientists, nuclear scientists, and that it allegedly passed on this information to the Israeli spy agency Mossad, which in turn helped the rogue regime of Netanyahu to carry out their targeted assassination. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, also faced condemnation from the Iranian government for misleading statements that provided context to the Israelis and their Western backers to justify the illegal attack on Iran. Though Grossi clarified his stand later, but he still didn't issue an unequivocal statement rejecting the claims that Iran was weeks away from producing nuclear bombs. He kept using terms such as systematic, etc., to continue to create doubt in people's minds.
It was an important consideration. I understand what you're saying, but the fact that they continue to cite this report, based on your assessments, given what the U.S. intelligence community has been saying, and it's contradicting what the Israeli intelligence is saying, the Americans have continued to say, and Tulsi Gabbard said 2 months ago to the Senate Estimates Committee, the intelligence community has continued to say that we don't believe that Iran at this point in time is trying to weaponize. Is that your assessment as well?
Well, that was not in the same way. We have different mandate, different approach than the national intelligence of a country. For us, on the basis of our inspections, on the basis of our own evaluations, we came to the conclusion that we could not affirm that there is any systematic effort in Iran at the moment to manufacture a nuclear weapon. While we say that, at the same time, we say Iran is enriching 60% uranium, the only country in the world doing that. So there were elements for concern.
Grossi also didn't use his office to formally and repeatedly highlight that the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, first by Israel and then by the US, was a violation of the international law. He only said it once during his address to the United Nations Security Council as a passing reference, and that's it.
In this regard, as I also reminded the Board of Governors of the IAEA, there are numerous General Conference resolutions on the topic of military attacks against nuclear facilities, in particular resolutions General Conference 444 or 533, which indicated that any armed attack and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes is a violation of the principles of the Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency.
So if Netanyahu justifies his depravity against Iran by claiming he was only there to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities, the end result is now the exact opposite. Meanwhile, even rogue organizations like the BBC is now contradicting the US claims to have obliterated Iran's uranium enrichment site in Isfahan. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he just defended the effects of US strikes on Iran, referencing to the uranium conversion facility at Isfahan. Let's listen to him first here.
Here's a fact. The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility. We can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone. It's wiped out. It's wiped out.
Now let's break his heart. This is the before and after photo posted by the BBC, which is no friend of Iran, we all know. This photo shows that the conversion facility is still easily visible in the latest Maxar image with some damages to buildings. But Rubio would tell you the facility can't be seen at all because Americans have completely destroyed it. Dear Americans, you have a bunch of clowns running your country. Then there is a second setback to Netanyahu. Even Donald Trump has now humiliated him and his army of terrorists called the IDF, mocking Israel's air defense system and praising Iranian military for its ability to hit Israel hard. Trump said this.
Iran, look, they've got a country and they've got oil and they're very smart people and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings and they've been great.
Trump is currently in The Hague, in Netherlands, to attend the NATO summit, where he made these comments. I have repeatedly explained the details of both the long-term and short-term losses suffered by Israel at the hands of Iranians who overwhelmed Netanyahu by firing ballistic and hypersonic missiles. You can watch all my videos on this conflict on this channel. And not to forget the PR disaster that Israel continues to experience globally. This is Candace Owens on the Piers Morgan show.
Who's saying, I don't know, death to China or death to Russia? What is it specifically about America?
Well, they say death to America, death to Israel, death to the United Kingdom, actually.
Oh, okay.
Death to pretty much anyone that wants to stand up to them.
Could have had something to do with our actions in the Middle East is why I'm saying that we need a change in foreign policy. It maybe has something to do with just like killing 1 million Iraqi civilians, okay, because Bibi Netanyahu got on a congressional stage and said there are weapons of mass destruction, and we took that to the bank and there actually were no weapons of mass destruction, so we just killed 1 million. It could have something, I could be crazy, it could have something to do with our actions in the Middle East. The fact that we have 2,000 troops stationed in Syria right now under the guise of saying that we're fighting ISIS, while at the same time we know that Bibi Netanyahu funded the Al-Qaeda adjacent fronts because he wanted to overthrow Syria. And they, again, expand their borders, immediately take on territory and sell us absolute nonsense. We're talking about funding Hamas. Bibi Netanyahu funded Hamas. There is footage of Bibi Netanyahu saying this stuff on camera. So it's just so ridiculous to me to pretend that they're in some predicament, that they may be eradicated soon, which is why they have to keep funding all of these terrorist groups and then pretending that they're victims of terror, when in fact they are people that are imparting it worldwide. side. I just think that, like I said, Generation 9/11 has grown up. And I think that our eyes are very clear here. And we recognize that our relationship with Israel has become increasingly problematic. And it always was problematic. So I'll again ask the questions, Piers. I'm asking you because we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Name something positive that our Zionist AIPAC foreign policy has brought to America.
As if this is not enough, a man called Zohran Mamdani, a South Asian and Muslim politician, has just humiliated Netanyahu's lawyer at the International Criminal Court, Andrew Cuomo, to become the mayoral candidate of the Democratic Party in this year's New York elections. If elected, his victory in November will make him the first ever South Asian and Muslim mayor of New York. Just listen to his views on Netanyahu.
And Mayor Mamdani, would you welcome Prime Minister Netanyahu to New York City for whatever he comes for, given the US is not a signatory to the ICC, so he can travel to the US, unlike a lot of other countries. Would a Mayor Mamdani welcome Benjamin Netanyahu to the city?
No. As mayor, New York City would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. This is a city that our values are in line with international law. It's time that our actions are also.
Even though the US is not a signatory to the ICC?
No, it's time that we actually step up and make clear what we are willing to do to showcase the leadership that is sorely missing in the federal administration.
Who would have thought a brown and a Muslim man with an open stand against the rogue regime of Israel would defeat a pro-Israeli candidate in New York, of all the places? This has been possible because of the changing perception against Israel for its horrible war crimes and Holocaust. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on.
Go figure. Follow me.